You're all gonna be doing that. Oh, look at that! Taking it like a champ!
This episode of The Walking Dead was undeniably the most oppressive one. Abraham, the tough guy, had his head brutally bashed in by Negan, Rosita and Sasha. As Abraham's women are bleeding inside, they couldn't bear to look. They could only hear the sound made by each blow of the club. In the post-apocalyptic world, the greatest helplessness is not death, but watching your teammates die horribly without being able to do anything about it. This may have been the biggest setback Rick's team had encountered. I don't know how many blows it took, but Abraham's head had become a pile of broken flesh. Negan, the madman, relished the feeling of controlling everything. With a swing of his baseball bat, blood splattered on Rick's face, the blood of his teammate. Rick dared not resist, knowing that everyone here would die if he did. Negan then walked over and saw Rosita's tears of grief and immediately realized the connection between her and Abraham. Then came the taunting words that showed Rosita the blood on the baseball bat. Daryl finally can't take it anymore and drags his badly injured body into Negan's face, but is quickly stopped by a group of henchmen. Daryl is greeted with a severe beating before being pinned to the ground once again. Negan grew angrier as this act violated his rules of the game. Rick trembled, fearing that Negan might kill Daryl too. Negan said with a smile on his face,
That is a no-no.
Daryl had thrown that punch with the intention of certain death. He never wanted to live. Dwight then approached with a crossbow, asking if he should shoot Daryl with an arrow. However, Negan grabbed Daryl's hair and simply said, "No need. You can't just easily kill him." Dwight had to back off and drag Daryl back into the group. Negan was truly terrifying. He wouldn't tolerate anyone breaking his rules, which was probably why he had survived this long. For those who disobeyed, Negan wouldn't kill them outright. Instead, he psychologically broke them, making them fear and respect him. So for Daryl's offense, Negan will mete out the punishment.
Back to it.
It was a shock for everyone. Even Daryl's face turned pale. He never expected that his actions would put his good brother in such grave danger. This was the terrifying nature of Negan. Everyone's psyche had collapsed, and no one dared to challenge Negan's rules anymore. After Glenn had taken 2 blows, his eyes protruded in a horrifying sight. A sense of suffocation engulfed the group. This night seemed longer than an eternity. With all his strength, Glenn managed to utter his last words.
Maggie, I'll find you.
Maggie now lowers her head, unable to show any extreme behavior. This isn't what Glenn would have wanted. She carries Glenn's child in her belly.
I can see this is hard on you guys. I am sorry. I truly am. But I did say it. No exceptions!
The sound of the hammer hitting echoes in their hearts, one blow after another, suffocating and breathless. It's a bunch of demons, killing and tormenting others without mercy.
Lucille is thirsty. She is a vampire bat.
After several minutes, Glenn's head turns into a pile of minced flesh. This is the moment when countless viewers also start to take off their powder. Rick's team is filled with rage, but they dare not show it. Rick is feeling the same way. Glenn was the first comrade he met in Atlanta, and they have been through so much life and death together. Rick thinks, maybe at the beginning, they should have fought against Negan with all their might, even if it meant facing death head-on. Now, strangely, Rick is less afraid. He blurts out these words.
I'm gonna kill you.
In the past, when facing Gareth at Terminus, Rick said something similar.
Not today. Not tomorrow. But I'm gonna kill you.
Negan was a bit surprised and just stared at Rick. To be honest, Negan admired Rick a little bit. The average alpha would not dare to say that after seeing his tactics. Negan picks up Rick's axe and sarcastically asks if Rick plans to kill him with it. Next, Negan stood up and hung the axe on his waist. Rick was dragged into the car like a dead dog, and Negan followed suit. He threw Rick inside and slammed the axe on the table. Then, Negan went towards the front of the car, indicating he was taking Rick for a ride. Rick glanced at the axe on the table. This was his best chance to strike back. However, Negan was prepared and intentionally tested whether Rick dared to make a move. Without firing a shot, Negan punched Rick's abdomen and struck the axe on the table again, warning him not to try anything foolish. He threatened Rick to think about what fate his companions would face. The car started moving, and Rick had no idea where this lunatic was taking him. Rick didn't know where this madman was going, and the scene of his teammates on their knees and the scene where they met came to mind. As dawn broke during the drive, Rick became calmer, thinking about the impending fate of his friends. Without realizing it, the car had stopped. Negan approached the car door and opened it, revealing dense fog outside and many zombies within. Negan then tossed the axe onto the car roof and ordered Rick to retrieve it. He said, "Do that, and we'll be friends." Rick's face paled slightly. This was using him as a dog. If he did it, then he would be admitting to being Negan's lapdog. Zombies began to approach, and Negan effortlessly killed them while observing Rick, who remained unfazed. Negan leaned down and said again with some annoyance, "Go and pick up my axe." Rick understood that this was his final opportunity. If he didn't comply, he and his friends would die. Thrown out, Rick quickly attracts zombies, and in order to survive he needs to pick up that axe. With no weapon in hand, he had no choice but to rely on evasive maneuvers. There's too many zombies here, and the view was compromised. After a fierce struggle, Rick managed to climb the stairs and reach the car roof where the axe lay. It was then he realized he had returned to the spot where a fallen tree had blocked their path during the day. Looking around, Rick saw that the person who had been hanged on the bridge earlier had now turned into a zombie. This sight made him ponder the cruelty of the post-apocalyptic world and the fate that awaited them all. Lost in his thoughts, Rick knelt on the car roof. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. He felt utterly powerless. The previous confident Rick, who believed he could conquer any obstacle, now found himself crushed by the saviors, as if facing an insurmountable mountain. Slowly, Rick laid down on the roof of the car, as if that would be an escape from what was happening. Negan's voice echoed, warning Rick that if they didn't return promptly, all his friends would die. Rick glanced at the small axe, realizing that it held the fate of all of them in his hands. Negan's voice came back, seemingly out of patience, followed by a volley of shots at the roof of the car. Rick quickly leaped, holding onto a nearby zombie's body. The zombie's neck would soon snap as his center of gravity swayed in the air. However, countless zombies below were waiting for him to fall, making the situation increasingly perilous. Becoming zombie food was only a matter of time. Just then, Negan opened fire, clearing the zombies below, and Rick fell to the ground. Negan went on to say that time is running out. Rick, think about what could have happened to your teammates. Rick was in a hurry too. Images of other people getting their heads blown off were literally flooding his mind. So he rushes through the zombie horde looking for the axe, and finally finds it in a patch of grass. Rick takes the axe and hacks his way back to the RV, but when he tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge, and the zombies started closing in. Rick can only fend off the zombies at the door. When Rick runs out of steam, Negan opens the car door and shoots at the zombies. Once in the car, Negan looks at Rick and holds out his hand, and Rick has the good sense to hand over the axe. The car then began its journey back, and soon, they came to a stop. Negan wiped the axe clean and handed it to Rick. Taking it meant becoming Negan's lapdog. Rick looked at Negan with a gaze filled with anger and unwillingness, something Negan didn't want to see. He threw Rick down again and dragged him forward like a lifeless dog. Negan had taken Rick out to change him, but he still saw that rebellious look in Rick's eyes, as if he would seek revenge at the first opportunity. That was not something Negan would allow. Rick now tried to be obedient, not wanting to cause any further complications. Negan's next action would shatter Rick's will entirely. He called Carl over and wrapped a belt around his arm, forcing him to lie beside his father. Negan drew a line on Carl's arm, and then he instructed Rick to swing the axe along that line. The choice was cruel: either cut off Carl's arm or watch everyone die, including Carl, and the entire community would suffer the same fate.
We understand. We understand.
I'm not sure that Rick does.
Rick panics and pleads with Negan to cut off his arm or even kill him, but Negan, being cunning, refused. This was his way of instilling fear.
Oh my God. Are you gonna make me count? Okay, Rick. You win. I am counting. 3!
Please. It could be me. Please.
2!
Please don't do it.
This is it. 1! You answer to me. You provide for me. You belong to me. Right?
The terrifying day finally came to an end. Rick now understood what he had to do. Negan had Dwight take Daryl as a hostage, further threatening Rick's group. If anyone attempted deceit, Daryl would be brutally killed. Daryl felt guilty for Glenn's death and dared not resist. Negan then announced that they would begin collecting their first tribute the following week, and if it wasn't enough, they would use lives to make up the difference. The surrounding saviors started dispersing, leaving Rick's team in a desolate state. The events of the previous night had left a deep shadow in their minds, and no one spoke. After sitting there for about half an hour, Maggie stood up and everyone looked at her with concern. Maggie was overwhelmed with guilt, blaming herself for the situation they encountered because she had been the reason they went to the Hilltop. Maggie suggested that Rick should take everyone back while she could go to the Hilltop alone. Rick still told Maggie that they are still a family. They can't leave her alone. Finally, Sasha suggests that she send Maggie to the top of the mountain and that the others need to get back to deal with the saviors. They took Abraham and Glenn's bodies to the car. It was a very dark day. No one dared to talk about revenge. In other words, how to get revenge. The saviors had destroyed them psychologically, and they had an army. The sparkle was gone from Rick's eyes. From now on, they were the walking dead. In this post-apocalyptic world, there exists such a place where not only livestock are reared and vegetables are grown, but children also receive education. Everywhere, there is a sense of tranquility. This community bears the beautiful name of the kingdom. Carol was injured before, and Morgan brought her here for help. Morgan tells Carol that he will take her to meet the king of this place. Carol is surprised that not only is the community called the kingdom, but its leader also refers to himself as the king. When they enter a hall, a loud tiger's roar echoes throughout the room. Carol is startled to find a tiger here, but Morgan remains composed. Sitting on the platform is Ezekiel, the king who founded the kingdom. The tiger is his pet and a symbol of his identity. The kind and gentle Ezekiel gets along well with Morgan. Carol is hesitant to speak and seems afraid of the tiger. Ezekiel wonders why Carol is silent. If she thinks he's crazy, or if she thinks everything here is an illusion, he urges her to share her thoughts. For the first time, Carol showed this kind of smile. Haven't seen Carol this happy since the end of the world. Don't know if it's faked or real. And then stammered before saying a few polite words, but the overall expression is shocked. Ezekiel's reaction to Carol is not surprising, as most people are surprised when they first meet him. Nevertheless, he develops a liking for Carol, and they engage in a pleasant conversation. Of course, this is just a small episode, a rare moment of ease in this post-apocalyptic world. By mid-afternoon, Ezekiel had taken a few people out, and Morgan was invited to join in the action. Their destination is a small town enclosed by fences. There are many piglets kept here that feed on zombies, and now it's time to harvest them. They quickly corral the piglets into a room where a zombie is still hanging. Ezekiel appreciates Richard's method, as it was his idea. Morgan is curious about using zombies as food, and Richard explains that they want the pigs' stomachs to be filled with rotten flesh, leaving Morgan even more puzzled. Half an hour later, they loaded all the pigs into the car. A zombie approached. Ezekiel told the kid Benjamin to kill it. He had been practicing how to kill zombies at home and now was the chance to do it. Benjamin took a deep breath, summoned up the courage to rush forward, and slashed the zombie's shoulder. He was so nervous that he forgot to aim at the head of the zombie, and the knife was still stuck inside the body. In the end, Ezekiel helped to kill the zombie. The king is a good man and doesn't blame him too much, but encourages Benjamin to adjust his mindset. Richard tells Morgan not to tell anyone in the kingdom about what happened here. Morgan didn't ask any questions but just nodded. They then drove back to the community again. In the following days, not much changed. People continued to grow vegetables and fruits, while the youth engaged in various community activities. Morgan's exceptional skills earned him Ezekiel's admiration, leading him to plead with Morgan to take Benjamin as his apprentice. The next day, Morgan was called out again, and this time, they arrived at an open area. They had slaughtered all the pigs they had brought the previous day, but this time, it was done far away from the kingdom. Morgan remained puzzled, not knowing the purpose behind these actions. Soon, 2 cars arrived, carrying a group of people. It turned out that the kingdom, despite its appearance of tranquility, was also under the subjugation of the saviors. However, the residents were unaware of the agreement made, and so, Ezekiel came out each week to provide offerings. This week's tribute was the pigs. They were so pleased to see how much bigger the pigs were this time that the man at the head of the group asked them to help load up the trucks. This made Richard hate his guts. A woman tried to explain the origins of these people to Morgan, but he expressed that he was already familiar with them. During the loading process, Richard stood by, looking coldly at the saviors, which irritated one of them, Jared. Jared taunted Richard, thinking little of the pigs they brought and making insulting remarks. Richard couldn't help but to say a few words back, which made Jared angry. Jared wanted to beat up this kid, but he didn't expect Richard to dodge him and beat him up. The situation escalated, and weapons were drawn by others present. Richard and Jared wrestled. Ezekiel intervened and urged everyone to lower their weapons, instructing Richard to stop. Jared was furious and threw a few punches at Richard, who didn't retaliate to avoid further endangering others. Gavin, another member of the Saviors but seemingly less evil, stops Jared from continuing the fight, claiming that they've been stalling for a long time. Jared stopped there, but gave Richard the middle finger. For Benjamin, this was his first encounter with the cruelty of the world. These guys from the Saviors also drove away from the place. Jared makes a cocky face. After returning to the community, it was already evening. Morgan went to deliver dinner to Carol but found that she was gone. Morgan realized that Carol had been trying to get away from the people and had left the kingdom on her own. After dark, Carol is ready to leave in the night, but she doesn't expect to hear Ezekiel's voice. Ezekiel knew from Morgan that Carol was leaving, so he waited. Ezekiel was ready to talk to Carol alone. Ezekiel candidly said, "You came here pretending to be gentle and innocent, and you were clever. I believed it too. You infiltrated to gain people's trust, get what you wanted, and leave as if you never came. Those guns you brought in earlier were obviously the Saviors." Carol was surprised that they were aware of the Saviors. Ezekiel added that everyone underestimated her, but she fought back and won, which led him to invite her to stay. Carol smiled and sat down, calling both the kingdom and Ezekiel a joke. She explained that the outside world was the real cruelty, and she questioned if he believed he could live peacefully just by calling himself a king and being flattered by others. Ezekiel then revealed his past. He used to be a zookeeper, and the tiger wasn't tamed by him. He just saved the tiger's life. And since then, the tiger has followed him and brought him here to build a kingdom. He became a king as people needed a symbol to rally behind. Carol still chose to leave. Ezekiel has a soft spot for Carol, and since she doesn't want to stay, he offers to help Carol find a quieter place. Only Ezekiel and Morgan knew the location, which put everyone's minds at ease. "You can live your life there," Carol agreed. And the next day, Morgan brought her to this new place that would become her home. After leaving her there, Morgan bid farewell. From that day on, Carol resided in this new place. Occasionally, Ezekiel came to check on her. Daryl was confined to a dimly lit room, curled up in a corner, and each day he could only eat a meal made from dog food. If he refused to eat, starvation awaited him. Whenever the door closed, the room filled with blaring DJ music, preventing him from getting any sleep. Just as he thought the music had finally stopped and tried to fall asleep, it started again immediately. The Saviors aimed to completely break his spirit. The Saviors had a strict internal hierarchy, with Negan being the supreme authority. The rest were divided into 3 categories. The first category included people like Dwight, who directly served Negan. They not only didn't have to work at the base but also had the freedom to indulge in pleasures. The second category consisted of hard-working people without status, earning points to exchange for essential goods. People like Dwight had no need to queue up for anything. They could take whatever they wanted. Those around them didn't dare to say much and could even assault others at will. The third category comprised those who didn't follow orders. They were either sent to secure zombies to the fence or directly turned into zombies themselves. Negan admired Daryl and wanted him to serve him, but Daryl refused to submit, leading to his torment. Today, Dwight threw a set of clothes at Daryl. He took them, feeling uncomfortable being naked. A few minutes later, Dwight comes in with a weapon and prepares to take Daryl outside. Dwight seems to like Daryl's stuff and not only uses his crossbow, but also wears his jacket. The two traversed a long corridor, and Daryl constantly observed the place. This was the Savior's stronghold. Soon, they arrived at the infirmary, where awkwardly, Dwight's wife, Sherry, was also present. Of course, Sherry was now one of Negan's wives. Dwight's transformation into a cold-hearted person was related to this, and they had to pretend to be strangers when they met. Sherry recognized Daryl as the one who helped them and wanted to speak, but Dwight stopped them. Daryl sat down, and the doctor tended to his injuries. In the room, Dwight noticed a pregnancy test. and he looked at Sherry without expression. Dwight kept his vengeance for Negan taking his wife hidden inside, as revealing it would mean death for them. Daryl speculated that this might be the reason for Dwight's change. Sherry still walked up to Daryl and said, "Whatever they say, just do it." She was grateful to him and reminded him that compliance could spare him from further suffering. After the examination, Dwight took Daryl outside and flaunted in front of him, stating that he had learned to use the crossbow. Seeing that Daryl remained defiant, Dwight pressed him against an iron fence, saying that this would be his future if he didn't smarten up. He told Daryl that he could have the same status as him if he compromised and submitted to Negan. In reality, Dwight wasn't inherently evil. In The Saviors, he acted more cold-blooded and heartless to keep Sherry safe. For Daryl, who had helped them, Dwight's words just now had been a kind reminder. If Daryl surrendered to Negan, he would become a person of the first category. Undoubtedly, if he compromised, he wouldn't be Daryl anymore. In this post-apocalyptic world, life was full of helplessness, and Dwight could only close the door. The music resumed, making it impossible for Daryl to rest quietly. Daryl observed the door, his body now recovered, and he searched for an opportunity to escape. In the afternoon, Dwight went out on a mission, and another person, Joey, brought the meal to Daryl. Daryl still took the food and ate it heartily. Joey, also speechless by Daryl's stubbornness, just closed the door heavily. Daryl felt something was off with the sound, different from how Dwight locked the door. Quickly, he looked through the crack in the door and saw no one outside. He gently pushed, and the door opened just as he suspected. An opportunity to escape presented itself, and Daryl seized it, skillfully avoiding people in the hallway. But just then a hand grabbed him from behind. Daryl was ready to fight back, but then he saw it was Sherry. Sherry told Daryl to go back to his cell while he still could. She regretted what they had done, and she shouldn't have returned to this place. Negan was capable of unimaginable things, and escape was impossible. If they caught him, his fate would be terrible. Daryl didn't speak and chose to leave. He refused to kneel down like Dwight and his wife. The bright light outside gave Daryl the impression of an exit. Seeing no one outside and a few motorbikes, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to escape. He rushed out quickly, but unfortunately, the vehicles had no keys. As expected, Daryl was discovered, and several burly men surrounded him. Negan arrived whistling, appearing as though Daryl's escape was under their noses.
Who are you? Negan.
Here, everyone had to claim to be Negan.
Who are you?
Negan.
Negan wanted Daryl to understand that everything and everyone here belonged to him, and escape attempts were futile. Negan admired Daryl and gave him another choice. The first is to become a zombie to guard the wall. The second is to get out of the cell and earn points by working. But of course this is basically the lowest level. The third is to become his direct subordinate and live like a king. Daryl looked at Negan. Negan is a creep and makes such a fuss that the average person would be scared out of their wits. Negan was unpredictable, and no one could guess what he was thinking. Daryl ended up getting beat up by these guys. After the beating, Daryl was once again locked up. Then, a figure appeared outside the door, calling Daryl's name. It was Sherry. She told Daryl that she regretted stealing his motorcycle and shouldn't have returned here. She seemed to only want to talk to familiar people and share her feelings. After a while, the door was opened again, and Dwight came in with food for Daryl. Daryl didn't pick it up. Dwight said, "You got your buddy Glenn killed. I got the girl killed. Don't pretend this never happened." Mentioning Glenn struck a chord in Daryl, who hurled the food at Dwight. Dwight was angry, saying that if Negan didn't admire Daryl, he would have killed him already. Then, Dwight posted a photo on the wall and left. Daryl looked at the photo that Dwight had thrown on the floor. It showed Glenn's head being bashed in. He felt immensely guilty, wishing that it had been him who died. This tough man only showed his vulnerability when no one else was around. The last time Daryl cried was when Beth died. Dwight hadn't left and heard it outside the door. Daryl, it's good for this guy to cry with the guilt he's been holding in for so long. The next day, Dwight took Daryl to Negan's room. Negan appeared polite and smiled, saying, "Look, Dwight's doing just fine." He and his wife started from the bottom by working for points, but Sherry's sister was sick, and, as a stand-up guy, he decided to marry her and take care of her. But unexpectedly, Dwight and his wife stole all the medicine and ran away with my fiancé. We looked around for them, but they ran away. But guess what? Dwight came back on his motorbike with his wife, begging for my forgiveness, pleading with me not to kill Shirley. I went soft. I wanted to just kill Dwight, but I didn't realize that Shirley was willing to be my woman just in exchange for Dwight's life. Negan found the proposal amusing and agreed. He punished Dwight by scarring his face. It's hard on Dwight's heart, too. with his wife becoming this pervert's woman, and him having to pretend to be cold-blooded and work for Negan. He even became one of Negan's best men so he could keep Sherry alive. Negan shared this story to make Daryl decide. All Daryl has to do is say he's Negan like everyone else and he'll be free of the torment he's in. Looking at the look on Negan's face, this was the last limit of his patience. Daryl stayed silent and Dwight was all nervous for Daryl, wishing the guy wasn't so stubborn. Daryl looked up.
Who are you?
Daryl. This is the old
Face!
In the end, Negan didn't kill Daryl but kept him locked up. Dwight was also angry and scolded Daryl. "Why are you so stubborn?" Daryl spoke up unexpectedly. "I know why you kneeled, why you accepted this bastard. You did it for your wife's sake." Daryl hit a nerve. Dwight had been silently enduring all along. Dwight closed the door silently and went outside, looking at the zombies by the fence. This man is a former friend of Dwight's who escaped yesterday and was captured by him. And today he's a zombie. Dwight regrets coming back of his own accord and wonders if he's doing the right thing or the wrong thing. A tall figure carrying a baseball bat.
Little pig, little pig!
This silhouette is enslaving other survivors in the apocalypse.
Let me in!
The person is none other than Negan, the leader of the Saviors, who is visiting Rick's community for the first time. Spencer opens the door.
Who are you?
Oh, you better be joking.
While they converse, Rick arrives, his eyes still filled with sorrow and anger.
Do not make me have to ask.
Reluctantly, Rick opens the gate. Negan quickly regains his confident smile, saying he came because he missed Rick. At that moment, a zombie approaches from behind Negan. He tells Rick to watch and effortlessly dispatches the zombie with his baseball bat. Rick doesn't look at Negan but scans the people he brought along. There are over 20 of them. Thankfully, Daryl is among them and still alive, but he looks like he's been through a lot, causing Rick both heartache and guilt. Negan's voice came again. "You give me tribute, and I'll help you kill zombies. It's a deserved reward." Then Negan enters the community, making Rick carry his baseball bat. Rick has never been one to take a loss, but resisting could get all the people here killed, and that's something he doesn't want to see. Negan came in and was struck by how rich the neighborhood looked. As Rick turns back, he calls out to Daryl with concern, but Negan sternly stops him. Negan warns Rick not to look at Daryl or talk to him, otherwise, he'll make Rick personally remove the body part from Daryl. Rick can do nothing but comply. Negan wasn't here today to have fun, but to sweep up supplies with his man. Rick hastened to say that they had already divided half the supplies as agreed and could just take them away. Negan corrects him instantly, saying that everything they have belongs to him, and he decides what they take.
You heard the man. Move out!
He then leads his group into the community like bandits. The residents, unfamiliar with Negan's madness, are helpless. Negan asks Rick to give him a tour inside. Once they are gone, Dwight stops Rosita and takes away her and Spencer's guns, along with all the weapons in their car. Dwight orders Rosita to bring Daryl's motorcycle, though she claims it's not in the community. Dwight insisted on the motorbike and even took her hat. Rosita cannot afford to provoke these thugs and has to go out to find Daryl's motorcycle since she knows where it is. The Saviors were frantically ransacking the community, taking away many household items, including furniture and mattresses. Negan leisurely watches his man, in a delightful mood, claiming he is reasonable. That's when the men found a camera and gave it to Negan. Negan becomes interested and starts watching a recording Deanna made of Rick's group when they first arrived. He mocks Rick's former fierce appearance with a big beard, saying he wouldn't dare mess with that man. Then Negan points the camera at Rick again, teasing him. "You are not that bearded man anymore, are you?" Rick feels indignant and furious at being humiliated like this. Negan inquires about Maggie, teasingly saying that she became a widow despite being so beautiful, and he wonders if she's lonely. Hearing Negan taunt Maggie, Rick's eyes fill with rage. Rick quickly averts his gaze, not wanting any further trouble, but he tightly grips his baseball bat, afraid he might lose control and attack this maniac. Finally, Negan expresses his desire to meet Maggie. Gabriel introduces himself with a smile on his face and he tells Negan that Maggie is dead. Gabriel led Negan to the graveyard to verify it, and indeed, there was a wooden sign with Maggie's name on it. Looking at the graves, Negan goes back to his regretful mourning, stating that he had no choice in Glenn's and their deaths. Rick listened with a serious expression. Gabriel patted the dust on his leg. It was obvious that he had faked this grave. Gabriel knew he couldn't let Negan know that Maggie had gone to the Hilltop, or else he might be seen as colluding with them. While Negan kept talking, a gunshot was heard from inside the community. Negan's face turned grim, anticipating that there might be a need for killing today. Carl was the one who fired the shot. According to the agreement, the saviors were supposed to take only half of their supplies, but they completely ransacked their house, which made him very angry. Rick was anxious and quickly tried to persuade his son to put down the gun.
Oh, really, kid?
You should go before you find out how dangerous we all are.
Well, pardon me, young man, and excuse the shit out of my goddamn French, but did you just threaten me?
Rick, standing nearby, was sweating, afraid of provoking this madman. Surprisingly, Negan didn't get angry and showed patience with Carl, not making a fuss over the incident. Carl eventually handed the gun over to his father. Negan picked up the pistol and said, "You know what, Rick? You guys have too many guns, and that's not good. You guys should have a lot of guns yourselves. Plus you got a bunch of guns from destroying one of my strongholds earlier. All of these together, I can't imagine how many guns there are." Negan decided to take all the guns from the community, not leaving a single one behind. This was unexpected for Rick. Even the rocket launcher fell into Negan's hands. Negan also thought about the team he sent out earlier, probably blown to bits by this very weapon. A woman responsible for guarding the weapons was brought out by Negan's men because they found 2 handguns missing from the register. Rick's expression changed as it was evident that someone had secretly taken and hidden the guns. Negan's face turned even darker, knowing that someone was secretly hoarding weapons, meaning there were those who wanted to resist. If they can't find the gun, the armory keeper, Olivia, she could be killed and others could face the same fate. Rick urgently gathered all the people from the community to explain the seriousness of the situation. He reluctantly told them that they were now captives and Olivia's life was at stake. However, everyone in attendance remained silent, no one confessing to taking the guns. Rick goes on to say that most of you weren't there and don't know what these people are like, but right now we need to keep everyone alive and give them what they want so we can survive. Aaron's boyfriend stood up and asked how they could get out of this situation later if they gave their guns to the saviors. Rick knew that everyone wanted to resist and not be enslaved, but he helplessly explained that they couldn't escape now. Now the chief is Negan, not him. Eugene pointed out that some people hadn't shown up, and they might be the ones who took the missing guns. Rick immediately thought of Spencer. As expected, they found the missing guns hidden in a compartment in Spencer's room. Negan took the last 2 handguns and was finally ready to leave the community. Rosita returned after searching for the motorcycle. At that moment, Rick noticed Michonne hiding and asked Negan for some time to talk to her. Negan turned his head, seeing Michonne, and then refused Rick's request.
No.
Rick said that because he knew Michonne was out hunting today and was carrying a gun. Rick once again lowered his stance and in a pleading tone asked Negan to let him talk to Michonne. Negan was satisfied with this and agreed. Rick hurriedly ran to Michonne and asked her to hand over the rifle. Michonne had always used a katana and went hunting to practice with the gun, always prepared for revenge. Rick could only plead again that if they found the gun someone would die. Soon, Michonne and Rick walked over together. Michonne didn't even look at Negan but noticed Daryl. Rick quickly explained that Michonne had been out hunting, and the gun had been on the watchtower, so it wasn't stored in the armory. Negan was pleased with Rick's initiative and praised him for doing well. Rick also took the opportunity to say that they've realized that Negan is the boss and just want to beg you to keep Daryl. Negan bluntly replied that it was impossible. Rick was left speechless. Negan continued, saying that perhaps if Daryl came to him and begged, he might consider it. Both of them looked at Daryl, but Daryl simply turned his head away. He wouldn't beg that bastard. It was out of the question.
Daryl?
Negan stated that Daryl didn't want to and he couldn't blame him. Afterwards, Negan reminds Rick that if they don't have something interesting in the next tribute, someone will die, especially no more guns. Having said all that, Negan instructed his men to take the deer, and they headed back home for dinner. Michonne, feeling upset, dropped the deer and left without a word. Dwight took Daryl's motorcycle, and the saviors finally left. Rick stood there, staring into the distance, looking at his captured brother. He had a burning rage inside him but didn't dare to resist. Rick didn't want anyone else to die, and now even the weapons for resistance had been taken away. Later, Rick found Spencer and told him about the guns, but Spencer seemed very angry, and Rick entered his room. Rick was speechless. Olivia could be killed, and he cared more about whether Rick had entered his room or not. Rick continued, "I don't blame you for hiding the guns. but hoarding food and liquor is truly despicable. It's your luck to live behind these walls, and it's also your luck to have us. With that said, Rick turned to leave. Spencer said, "Yeah, we're really lucky. You brought us to this paradise. I guess Glenn and Abraham were also lucky." Ha! Hearing that, Rick stopped in his tracks. Anger surged through his heart.
You say anything like that again to me, I'll break your jaw, knock your teeth out. You understand? Say yes. Yes.
How dare this ignorant fool mock them? Spencer's always had a problem with Rick. His mother was the founder, so he believed he should be the leader of the community. But now, these outsiders had taken over, without anyone noticing. Rosita looked around, then reached into the wheel of a car and pulled out a pistol. It was the gun Rosita had found on a walker when she went out to search for the motorcycle, but it had no bullets. That night, Rosita stood outside Eugene's door. Rosita wanted to kill Negan to avenge Abraham.
Make me a bullet.
Back to it.
After Glenn's death, Maggie was devastated. She didn't want to burden the team anymore and decided to go to the Hilltop alone. Eventually, Sasha took it upon herself to protect Maggie on their journey to the Hilltop. Before long, they arrived at the Hilltop. Dr. Harlan examined Maggie and explained a bunch of medical jargon, basically saying her health wasn't good. Maggie felt scared and asked anxiously if she had lost her baby. Harlan shook his head, assuring Maggie that although her condition was risky, it was only mild, and the baby was healthy. Maggie breathed a sigh of relief. With Glenn gone, this child became even more precious, serving as Maggie's motivation to keep going. However, Harlan advised Maggie to stay at the Hilltop from now on, in case any emergencies arose. When she comes out, Maggie goes to Glenn's grave and Sasha gives her the pocket watch she found on Glenn's body. Abraham left behind only a cigar. Marge and Sasha, they are sad. Instead of putting away the watch, Maggie placed it on Glenn's tomb. At that moment, Jesus also arrived with 2 bouquets, expressing his condolences and comforting them, urging them to look ahead in life. Then Gregory appeared there too. Seeing Maggie's improved condition, he questioned them. "Didn't you say you wiped out the Saviors?" Maggie could only briefly explain the Saviors' situation. They had only taken down 1 outpost, while the real Saviors numbered in the hundreds. Gregory felt alarmed, fearing that the Saviors might find out that the Hilltop was involved too. Maggie reassured him that they hadn't leaked any information. Relieved, Gregory advised them to leave early the next morning. If the Saviors discovered them, it would be trouble. Ironically, Gregory, as a leader, was probably the worst among all the teams. Since the Hilltop's establishment, he could only remember Jesus' name. He would call everyone else by the wrong names. He even mistook Sasha for a Hilltop member and advised her and Maggie to keep their distance. Gregory's idea is simple: just play dumb in the end times. It's better to be alive than anything else. Meanwhile, in Alexandria's safe zone, the tribute day was approaching, and Rick planned to take some people out for a few days to scavenge for supplies. Initially, he wanted to bring Carl along, but Carl resisted, not willing to accept that fate. In his heart, his father was the bearded man who could overcome any challenge. Helplessly, Rick and Aaron set out together, as staying alive was the most important thing. Shortly after they left, Enid decided to climb the wall and go to the Hilltop to check on Maggie's condition, and Carl accompanied her. As Carl and Enid walked on the road to the Hilltop, their mutual affection grew, and in each other's company, they no longer hid their feelings. Though they didn't have a car, the long journey felt sweet and easy. That night, while Maggie was sound asleep, she was suddenly awakened by noises from outside. Sasha looked out and saw that the gate had been opened, and there was a car parked in the middle blaring loud music. Zombies had already started coming in, and to make matters worse, someone had locked all their doors and windows shut. Fortunately, there was a window on the roof of the RV. Sasha told Maggie to stay inside and said she would handle things outside. After Sasha came out, there were already over a dozen zombies inside. She quickly jumped off the RV, intending to shut off that damn music. As Sasha stepped down, Maggie also climbed to the top of the RV. She turned and saw Jesus, shouting loudly for him to help Sasha. Jesus didn't hesitate and immediately flipped down from the 2nd floor. Meanwhile, Maggie continued to direct the others to find a way to close the main gate. As for Gregory, the so-called leader of this place, He took one look at the window and was scared out of his wits. Acting like an invisible man, Sasha killed zombies all the way and finally arrived at the car. However, the car was firmly fixed and the doors couldn't be opened. There was even a middle finger gesture at the rear of the car, which was obviously done deliberately by someone. Sasha tried to pry the car open for a while, but it wouldn't budge, and more zombies were attracted to the noise. As they were about to go back to close the gate, a loud rumbling sound was heard. Maggie was actually driving a big-footed vehicle and crushing over, seemingly trying to crush the car. Jesus and Sasha continued to kill the zombies. The big-footed vehicle arrived, and as expected, it rolled over the car without any problems, and the music finally stopped. The crisis of the night was resolved. Early the next morning, Jesus came to Gregory's office to ask if he was going to kick them out after Maggie and Sasha had been so helpful last night. But Gregory told Jesus that he was the one in charge, not him. In fact, Jesus knew Gregory wasn't leadership material, and if he wanted to take over, the people inside would support him 100%. However, Jesus didn't like such power struggles. While they were arguing, Sasha and Maggie walked in. Gregory directly told them he appreciated their help last night and would repay them with a can of tomato sauce. But now it was time for them to leave. Sasha was not pleased and said they wouldn't leave no matter what. She asked him to state his conditions. Gregory shamelessly looked Sasha up and down and then suggested they talk privately. Just the two of them.
Explore.
Go to hell.
Gregory didn't think this woman would dare to insult him and was prepared to drive them away again. Just then, the roar of a car engine came from outside, and everyone nervously looked out. Oh no! It was the Saviors coming. Gregory hurriedly asked Jesus to hide Sasha and Maggie in the closet and told them to stay quiet. Maybe they could save their lives. Gregory took a sip of wine, preparing to deal with these bandits. This time, it was Simon, Negan's right-hand man, who came here with over 20 of the Saviors. Gregory timidly opened the mansion's door to greet them. This was Simon's first time here. It's always been the stronghold that Rick took out that does the docking. Gregory greeted them with false enthusiasm. Simon asked Gregory to talk in his office, as there were some questions that needed answering. Soon they were seated. Simon directly told Gregory that they were the ones responsible for last night's incident. Wanting to show the people here what zombies looked like, Gregory dared not get angry but instead expressed gratitude for the Savior's kindness. Simon then mentioned the outpost that was wiped out. Gregory acted surprised, claiming it was the first time he had heard of it. During the conversation, Gregory continued to flatter and express loyalty to Negan. Simon appreciated Gregory's behavior and praised him for doing well. As long as he didn't try to deceive or play tricks, he could live well. At this point, Gregory's expression became a little unnatural. He thought of Maggie and the others inside, and the consequences would be dire if they were discovered. Simon also noticed Gregory's expression and asked if there was anything he wanted to say. After much consideration, Gregory decided to take Simon to the closet. They walked out of the office and headed towards the closet. Jesus was surprised. This old man was actually going to betray Maggie. Gregory reached the closet and gave Jesus a look. Jesus shook his head, but Gregory still opened the cabinet. Simon was surprised and asked if he was joking, as there was nothing inside. Gregory improvised and quickly took out his precious bottle of aged wine, claiming it was a treasure. In the end, Simon took away all of Gregory's cherished wine, leaving him feeling heartbroken. Jesus gloats over Gregory. Simon's purpose for coming here was to sweep through and take half of what they considered theirs in supplies, then re-establish ties with the Hilltop. When Simon walks up to the door, the mannerisms felt like an imitation of his boss, Negan. Simon turned back to Gregory and said,
Can I just get a kneel out of you?
Excuse me?
Kneel.
That's a solid meal, Gregory.
Gregory nodded. In his mind, as long as he could stay alive, these things were trivial. Satisfied, Simon left to direct his people. Just then, Carl and Enid arrived at the Hilltop gate, just in time to see the Saviors loading things onto trucks. Carl seemed a bit disappointed that Negan didn't come personally. Enid realized that Carl didn't come to protect her specifically. He must be planning something against Negan. Enid knew she had no reason to stop Carl. she could only tell him to come back alive. And they said their goodbyes with a kiss. Inside the house, Jesus released Sasha and Maggie. Gregory stormed in and shouted at Jesus, "I told you to hide them in the hallway closet, but you put them in my bedroom." Actually, Jesus had anticipated that this old man might change his mind, so he changed the hiding place. This time, Jesus stood firm and told Gregory that Maggie and Sasha had to stay, or else he wouldn't mind taking over his authority. Seeing Jesus being so strong-willed, Gregory redirected his anger towards Maggie and continued to praise the saviors for being reasonable. Gregory is greeted by a big punch from Maggie. He was a classic case of a bully who was afraid of strong people, and now he didn't dare say anything. Maggie looked at Gregory's waist and was appalled to see that he shamelessly took the watch from Glenn's grave. Maggie firmly told Gregory that from now on, this place was their home, and he had to learn to address them properly. No more nauseating nicknames like Marcia, dear, or sweetheart. My name is Maggie Ree. After that, Maggie took the watch back to Glenn's grave. However, she looked up and saw 3 green balloons tied there. Enid arrived there, and they hugged each other tightly. By the time the saviors had finished moving their stuff, they were ready to leave, and it was a couple of truckloads long. The Hilltop finally sent the bandits packing, but just behind the last truck, a figure climbed in stealthily. It was the agile Jesus. Once he got on, Jesus immediately picked up the alcohol that Gregory offered to the saviors and began drinking. He drank half and poured half out. Jesus was surprised. He didn't expect Rick's son to be inside the truck. What was this guy planning to do? On the post-apocalyptic road, 2 men are preparing to set off with their looted supplies. They are the saviors who came out from the hilltop. Little did they know that there were 2 people hiding in the cargo box behind the car. Jesus, looking at these things that were supposed to belong to their community, used a dagger to cut open the bottom of the box, planning to mess with them a bit. Then Jesus looked outside. Climbing up the car was not for the purpose of causing trouble due to discontent, but to see where the savior's lair was. Jesus dripped some soy sauce outside as a mark. After a few minutes, Jesus felt the speed of the car slowing down, probably getting close to the savior's lair, so he shouted to Carl to get ready to jump off. Carl hesitated and asked how to do it. Jesus told him to just jump down. They wouldn't get hurt as the car was moving slowly. They could roll in the direction of the jump and hide to follow the car.
Making a trail. We just gotta go now.
Okay, show me first.
We should bail out.
Jesus nodded and skillfully jumped down outside. After rolling a few times, he quickly ran behind nearby obstacles and looked at the car. However, Carl didn't jump off but instead made a farewell gesture to Jesus. Jesus laughed. It turned out he had been played by the boy. Soon, the car's speed had slowed down, and outside, they could see the barricades and zombies, indicating that they had reached their destination. Feeling that the car was about to stop, Carl quickly hid and picked up their rifle. He was ready to shoot Negan the moment he appeared. This time, Carl didn't plan to return alive. At this moment, the car came to a halt, and voices of people talking were heard outside. People started coming in and moving things. The man had just picked up the case of wine. Now that he's been spotted, Carl shoots the man.
Stay back! Drop your weapons. I only want Negan. He killed my friends. No one else needs to die.
Just as he finished speaking, whistling came from a distance. No doubt, Negan had arrived. Still smiling, looking at Carl and praising him for being brave, taking advantage of Carl's attention being diverted, one of Negan's men rushed up to snatch the gun. Though Carl managed to kill another person, he was pinned down by Dwight and had his gun taken away. Daryl, inside, could only watch helplessly. Negan approached Carl and didn't kill him. Instead, he held out his hand ready to pull Carl up. He even invited Carl to visit his territory, as if the deaths of his men moments ago were of little consequence. Carl just stared at Negan. Negan chuckled, saying, "You're just like your dad, with those annoying eyes." After a few more seconds and seeing that Carl was unmoved, Negan turned his gaze to Daryl, asking how his work was going, whether it was challenging enough for him, and whether he wanted to try working with only one hand. Carl understood that Negan was using Daryl to threaten him, so he had no choice but to hold Negan's hand. Negan led Carl first to the factory building, below which were all the people at the bottom of the base. They all knelt down when they saw Negan. Negan told the crowd that everyone would get fresh vegetables for dinner today, and that they wouldn't need work credits for it. Happy and grateful voices came from below. Negan is letting Carl know that he's the absolute authority here. Carl didn't envy it but rather felt sympathy for the people below. Next, Negan takes Carl to a house where all the women are his wives, including Dwight's wife, Sherry. They didn't have to work. They just had to look pretty and wait for Negan to call them. Negan didn't avoid Carl's presence and directly kissed Sherry in front of him. Sherry didn't dare to resist, but actively cooperated. I don't know if it was Negan's intention or not, but Dwight came here with Daryl and naturally saw the scene. Dwight's heart is like a knife, but on the surface, he still has to pretend to be cold-blooded and unperturbed. Then, Negan brought Carl to his bedroom and chatted with him for a while. Negan even had Carl remove his eye patch, not allowing him to wear it anymore. But Negan, a very perverted guy, makes fun of Carl's injured eye as disgusting, hurting Carl's already broken heart even more. Negan used a baseball bat to force Carl to sing while Negan swung the bat around. Every time Negan swung the bat, Carl's heart fluttered in fear that the next time it would hit him in the head. I must say that Negan was very good at casting shadows on people. After a while, Negan brought Carl back to the hall. There was a man bundled up in the hall who, like Dwight, had been robbed of his wife by Negan. Yesterday they had a secret rendezvous that was discovered by the others. This was a breach of Negan's rules, so he was to receive the branding iron. Negan took the iron and pressed it to the man's face. The hall echoed with screams and the sound of cooling. Everyone couldn't bear to watch the scene. The man ended up passing out from the pain of the burn. Negan approached Daryl and told him to hurry up and clean up, aiming to get Carl to watch the addressing the group. Negan declared that the wuss had passed out, but the situation was resolved, and any grudges were settled. The marks on his face would serve as a constant reminder of the importance of abiding by Negan's rules. Negan looks at Carl with a smirk on his face. Negan was very good at portraying himself as scary through other events so that people wouldn't dare touch his rules. Taking Carl back to his room, Negan was contemplating how to deal with him. Carl straightforwardly asked Negan why he didn't kill him, his father, or Daryl. Negan, patient with children, especially tough ones like Carl, replied that Daryl would eventually become one of his loyal soldiers. He suggested that Daryl might think he can handle it, but it wouldn't take long for him to submit. As for Rick, he had already started providing offerings to Negan. As for Carl, Negan hadn't finished having fun with him yet.
I'm thinking we're different.
You're a smart kid. What do you think I should do? You know I can't let you go. So, do I kill you? Iron your face? Chop off your arm? Tell me, what do you think?
I think you should jump out the window to save me the trouble of killing you.
Oh, now there is the kid that impressed the hell out of me.
I think you're not saying what you're gonna do to me because you're not going to do anything. If you knew us, if you knew anything, you would kill us. But you can't.
Maybe you're right. Let's go for a ride, kid.
From the beginning, Negan had no intention of killing Carl, so he planned to send him back to his community. Afterward, they set out in 2 trucks, with Jesus cleverly hiding on the rooftop, preparing to escape.
Daryl! You seem worried, so I'm taking the kid home.
If you do anything now.
Dwight! Daryl needs a timeout. Put him back in his box for a while.
Negan is an unpredictable person, and it's hard to know what he's thinking. Now he's even voluntarily sending Carl back. Of course, Negan is ready to stop by and collect this week's tribute, except that Jesus on the roof of the car is nowhere to be found. It wasn't long after they left that Daryl was shut in as well. There was a noise coming from the door lock, but no one came in. Daryl looked down and saw that someone had slipped a note in with a few words written on it. The message advised him to leave immediately, providing a matchstick and a key. which Daryl recognized as belonging to his motorcycle. He suspected that Sherry or Dwight had offered the assistance. Daryl pushed the door, and as expected, it opened. He didn't waste any time and quickly headed down the hallway. While walking, he heard voices arguing around the corner, followed by the sound of food being knocked over. Reacting swiftly, Daryl ducked into the nearest room, likely someone's living space. He checked the bedroom. Finding it empty, he changed into fresh clothes and helped himself to some food from a shelf, knowing he needed all the energy he could get to escape. When it seemed quiet outside, Daryl slipped out again, now holding a steel pipe for protection. He made his way to where his motorcycle was parked. At that moment, Joey approached, mistaking Daryl for one of their people, and greeted him. Joey was startled when Daryl looked up. Joey quickly raised his hands in surrender and nervously explained that the back exit was over there. He promised not to say anything and claimed he was just trying to survive. Much like Daryl at the moment, in the past, Daryl might have shown some mercy, but after being locked up, he had come to understand that these people were all the same.
Please.
Jesus had arrived by this time. He was ready to leave when he was on the roof of the car just now. However, when he heard that Daryl was locked up, he decided to investigate. Daryl looked at the body and recognized the gun behind it. It was Rick's revolver, and he was returning it to his best mate.
Ain't just about getting by here. It's about getting it all.
Jesus also picked up the man's walkie-talkie, realizing it would allow them to monitor the group's internal communications for valuable information.
What you doing up there?
You gonna eat that?
You know she's pregnant.
At the end of the road, a stunning beauty was walking towards us, and it was our old friend Tara. 2 weeks ago, Tara and Heath went out to search for supplies, but an accident occurred. Heath is now missing, and his fate is unknown, leaving Tara to return alone. Of course, Tara is unaware of the events that happened in the community. However, looking at Eugene's expression, something significant must have happened. When Tara returned to the infirmary, she learned about Glenn's tragic death and that her girlfriend Denise had also died. The impact of these losses was overwhelming for Tara to bear. In the afternoon, Negan arrived at the community with Carl, but Rick wasn't there. Rick had gone out 2 days ago to search for supplies and hadn't returned yet. Knowing this, Negan waits for him at Rick's house. Negan also saw Judith and seemed to have a fondness for the child, holding her as if he were the father of both kids. Meanwhile, Rick and Aaron were still out searching for supplies. After so much time has passed since the apocalypse, finding resources has become increasingly difficult. By chance, they came across a sign on a fence with a warning written on it, but they couldn't afford to worry about it. Tomorrow was the time for tribute. They continued forward, crossing through a forest and found another sign with a lot of information. Essentially, it stated that this was a private territory with powerful weapons, and anyone daring to enter would be shot. If you're reading this, it means I might already be dead, so feel free to take whatever you find. They breathed a sigh of relief and cautiously proceeded behind the sign. After a few steps, they saw a lake with many zombies still submerged in it. It seemed that the person had stored the supplies on a boat there, suggesting that the resources hadn't been taken by anyone else. They observed the situation and realized it wouldn't be easy to reach the boat. The boat was full of holes, and it wouldn't take long before it sank, but they had no other options. If they didn't deliver the supplies on time, someone would die. Aaron kicked a piece of wood, intending to use it as a makeshift oar. They set off quickly, trying to reach the other side before the boat sank completely, but it was no easy task. The noise attracted zombies, and the boat was sinking faster than expected. Worst of all, the zombies in the water were grabbing onto their boat. Within moments, several zombies swarmed around them, and they had to fend them off with the wooden board. Once they got rid of the zombies, they paddled desperately. The boat was now filling up with water, and it wouldn't be long before it sank. Fortunately, they were getting close to another boat, but to their surprise, there was a zombie lying inside. Aaron quickly backed off, and Rick killed the zombie, but the zombie in the water pulls Aaron down. Rick switched to another boat and shouted for Aaron to hold on. Aaron's situation was dire, with several zombies surrounding him, but Aaron still told Rick not to come over, and then his figure disappeared, and the zombie missed its target. Rick panicked and anxiously called out for Aaron. Rick breathed a sigh of relief. In the end, both of them managed to get on the big boat as well. It was a real thrill just now. After resting for a few minutes, they began to check the supplies inside. Luckily, everything they needed was there, from various foods to plenty of weapons. The boat's previous owner had left a note, congratulating them on winning but also stating that they had still lost in the end. The middle finger gesture was the person's final act of defiance. 1 hour later, they maneuvered the big boat to the shore and started loading the supplies onto their truck, including the weapons. Unbeknownst to them, there was a figure watching them from the lake shore. Back in the community, Spencer learned that Negan had arrived, and Rick was not present. Spencer brought a bottle of wine to please Negan. Spencer had dressed up for the occasion. He presented the wine to Negan, who accepted without refusal, mentioning that it would be perfect to play a game of pool in such good weather. Spencer pointed to the nearby garage, saying there was a table inside. As soon as Negan heard,
You may just be my new best friend.
it was this one comment that made Spencer so excited that he felt he squeezed into the circle. By this time, Rick and Aaron were back in the neighborhood. As soon as they opened the door, Rick froze. The saviors were here today. Rick was furious. When had he ever been humiliated by these little minions? The stuff they brought back was quickly brought down. If he knew the saviors were coming early, he should have hid the guns and ammo he found. And now it's cheap for these assholes. But just then, the woman flipped over the note with the gesture and read the words, "Congratulations on your win, but you still lost." The saviors were very upset and thought they had put it there on purpose to show their displeasure. Aaron explains that it was already in there, and that we wouldn't have done it. But the saviors don't care. As long as they find an excuse, they'll use it to show their superiority. Rick could only watch as Aaron got beaten up, knowing that resisting would only make things worse. On Spencer's side, he'd already brought up the pool table. Negan couldn't help but sigh. He couldn't play this stuff with Rick. He'd just stand there frowning and squinting at me with nasty eyes. At this point, Spencer also picked up on the fact that he had come here today to talk to Negan about Rick. Negan looked at Spencer thoughtfully with a smile on his lips, ready to hear what Spencer had to say. Spencer continued, saying that he knew what Negan was trying to do and the kind of community he wanted to build. He didn't agree with Negan's methods, but he understood that Negan was trying to establish a network where everyone contributed to the collective. Spencer also reveals that the community originally belonged to his parents, who managed it well until Rick got them killed and seized control. Spencer criticized Rick for his arrogance and his tendency to mess things up and take over everything based on his personal preferences. Negan understood what the guy was thinking and waited quietly for Spencer to reveal what he was up to. Spencer emphasized that he was Deanna's son and that he should have inherited the leadership of the community to become a leader like his mother. How could Rick know that while he was trying to keep everyone alive? Spencer was thinking about the power struggle. At this moment, Aaron was also badly beaten, and Rick rushes to help Aaron towards the infirmary.
You know, I'm thinking, Spencer. I'm thinking how Rick threatened to kill me, how he clearly hates my guts. But he is out there right now, gathering shit for me to make sure I don't hurt any of the fine people that live here. He is swallowing his hate and getting shit done. That takes guts. And then there's you. The guy who waited for Rick to be gone so he could sneak over and talk to me to get me to do his dirty work so he could take Rick's place. So I gotta ask, if you want to take over, why not just kill Rick yourself and just take over?
What? No, I don't.
You know what I'm thinking? Because I have a guess.
This sudden turn of events caught the surrounding residents off guard. Most of them were witnessing Negan killing someone for the first time, and his ruthlessness was shocking. Negan's strike caused Spencer's entrails to spill out, and he had no chance of survival. Negan killed someone as if it were an insignificant matter. Negan smiled with his baseball bat and said, "Anyone want to finish the game for Spencer? And someone to clean it up? By the way, Rosita couldn't take it anymore. Abraham was killed by this bastard, and now Spencer was killed by this guy." The crowd had a feeling that this was going to be bad, because Negan's brutality was well established. Negan tried his best to calm himself down. At this moment, Negan noticed a dropped bullet casing.
What is this? This little bad boy made from scratch?
Rosita remained silent, as she had already prepared herself for the worst. The bullet was the one Eugene had crafted for Rosita. Negan's mood had eased now, and he was impressed by the bullet's craftsmanship. Marveling at its ingenuity, Negan instructed his men to place a knife against Rosita's face and angrily said, "Lucille's smooth and beautiful face will never be the same again. Why should your face be smooth and beautiful, unless you tell me who made this bullet?" Rosita, unwilling to betray Eugene, claimed that she had made it. Negan is a brutal man, but he's smarter than anyone and he doesn't believe Rosita's words. Negan doesn't think Rosita has it in her. Negan gave Rosita another chance to speak up. Rosita was adamant and scornfully pressed her face against the knife, still claiming that she had produced the bullet. But Rosita had forgotten the kind of person Negan was.
Have it your way. Barat. Kill somebody.
No, it was me! No!
This is Negan. He doesn't kill those who offend him directly. Instead, he makes them live with self-doubt and guilt so that people will follow his rules. Unfortunately, Olivia fell victim to this. Rick and Aaron arrived at this moment. Negan's smile returned to his face, as if he was genuinely pleased to see Rick. He excitedly said, "Rick, how about saying thank you to me? Although our relationship started with me bashing your friends' heads in, we may never sit down and have a drink together, but can't you show a little gratitude? I have been trying to show you that I am a reasonable person. Your son was hiding in my truck, and he killed 2 or 3 of my men with a gun. Yet, I brought him back safely." Negan continued. Rick was also in shock. He went out looking for supplies and Carl went and did something like this. Negan went on, "And another one of your people tried to seize power in your absence, wanting me to kill you and take over. I took care of him for you. And then, this beautiful woman, she even shot at me, but I only killed an overweight woman." Rick looked at Negan with anger, finally understanding what had happened in his absence. Negan wasn't planning to leave just yet. He wanted to find out who made the bullet. He called for Erat, preparing to kill someone. Tara stepped forward and admitted it was her.
No, it wasn't.
Rosita also looked over unexpectedly. Eugene stepped forward and confessed, trembling with fear, but unwilling to let Tara sacrifice herself. Negan, however, was not going to let Eugene reveal the truth. Naturally, Negan won't let Eugene tell all. It's his secret weapon to rule further afield. What's the most precious thing in this world? Bullets. Of course, Eugene was trembling with fear and thought he was dead, but little did he know that he was Negan's biggest prize of the day. Upon Negan's command, the saviors put away their guns and prepared to leave. Rosita pleaded desperately, asking Negan to take her instead and spare Eugene, but this was Negan's way. The savior's presence cast a gloomy shadow over everyone's hearts. Even Rick couldn't hold back his tears. Was what they exchanged for their weekly tribute really just a means of survival? From that moment on, Rick's heart truly harbored the intention to resist. Merely compromising to survive was not a real solution. That night, Rick knelt in the basement, calmly contemplating their future path. That's when Michonne arrived. She had also been away for the past 2 days. Michonne had been considering resistance from the beginning, but Rick's priority was to preserve everyone's lives. The 2 days away had made Michonne think things through completely. She tells Rick that the saviors are numerous and very far away, but they can't just live in submission. They have to live with purpose. For Carl, for Judith, for Alexandria's safe zone, for the Hilltop they had to fight. Rick had once said they were capable people, and if they couldn't do it, then nobody could. Rick's agreement surprised Michonne, as she had suggested this before, but Rick had always clung to survival. What Michonne didn't know was that after the events of the day, Rick had already developed the desire to resist. Now, with Michonne's support, Rick's determination was even stronger. The next morning, at the Hilltop, Maggie climbed up the fence to take a look at the scenery. Since being enslaved by the saviors, her brow had been furrowed in worry, but as she gazed into the distance, her expression began to relax. Maggie let out a deep sigh, feeling a sense of relief. Suddenly, Maggie turned back and shouted inside, "Yes, her family is here." They hadn't seen each other for over 2 weeks since that time in the grove. Everyone was relieved to see Maggie safe and sound. Rick approached her and hugged Maggie, asking about her well-being. Maggie reassured him that she and the baby were doing well. Daryl and Jesus also came forward. Rick's eyes welled up with tears, and the emotions began to overwhelm him. The 2 close brothers embraced without saying much. Their silent hug spoke volumes about their deep bond, and their tears were hidden on each other's shoulders. Rosita and Sasha exchanged a smile. Now everyone has one goal, and that's to take down the saviors. They were fighting not just for themselves but for all the survivors in the region. Daryl then took out a gift from behind his back, which turned out to be Rick's revolver. At this moment, Rick's team, which had been demoralized for a week, had finally regained its confidence and returned to the team that believed that it could overcome all obstacles. The cloud of despair brought on by the saviors was dispelled, and now the choices ahead were clear. They would either die or fight to the end. They had come to the Hilltop seeking allies for their joint resistance. However, their attempts to convince Gregory to cooperate were met with rejection. Despite all the persuasive words from Rick and his group, Gregory refused to take any risks. Disappointed, they left Gregory's office. As they stepped outside, Enid came in and called everyone to come out and see. They then followed them out, and outside stood the residents of the Hilltop, which puzzled Maggie. One of the women came up and said, "Remember me? You saved my life once before, and then Maggie saved us all by taking care of the zombies." Enid says, "You're trying to convince Gregory to let us fight the saviors together. Is that true?" Maggie nodded affirmatively. No one wants to be enslaved again and have to give away on their knees what they've worked so hard to get. However, even with the support of the Hilltop residents, their numbers were still not sufficient, and they lacked adequate weapons. Daryl suggested using a powerful weapon to wipe out the savior's stronghold, either burning it down or bombing it. But Tara warns that there are still a lot of innocent workers in there, and now it's just a matter of uniting more communities, or else it's going to be hard to win at all. Rick decides to go back to the safe zone of Alexandria first because the saviors are sure to go to the community to look for Daryl when they find out he's missing, and it would be a problem if everyone wasn't there by then. Jesus stops them and tells them that they don't have to rush back, because Jesus has the savior's internal walkie-talkie, so he can overhear if anything happens. This is a brutal post-apocalyptic organization where anyone who disobeys is turned into zombie guards around the fence. The saviors have become the most terrifying presence in this region. Rick's group has finally had enough and decided to convince other communities to unite and resist. Under Jesus's lead, they drove to an open area, the outskirts of the kingdom. The car had just come to a stop. At the head of the group was Richard, who recognized his old friend Jesus, whom the two communities had come into contact with a long time ago. Jesus greeted them and introduced Rick, acknowledging him as a like-minded community leader. Richard understood the purpose of their visit and led them towards the kingdom. When Rick and his group entered, they were shocked. The place exuded a peaceful atmosphere, with various fruits and vegetables being grown. People seemed relaxed, without a hint of the post-apocalyptic vibe. It was hard to believe such a place existed. Rosita, however, points out that they are too comfortable in their lives. And although they are numerous, can they really fight? Rick looked at everything before him. This was the life he wanted to provide for his family. At that moment, Tara looked into the distance, thinking she might be mistaken. The others were drawn to her shout. To their surprise, it was Morgan. How did he end up here? Morgan was happy to see them too. Richard was astonished that they knew each other, and their favorable impression of Rick's group increased. He then led them to meet King Ezekiel. Rick and Daryl quickly inquired about Carol's well-being. Morgan explained that Carol was pursued by the saviors, but he found her and received help from the kingdom. However, Carol wanted to be away from people, so she left. Morgan didn't reveal Carol's whereabouts, as he promised not to disclose it to anyone. Relieved to know Carol was safe, both Rick and Daryl sighed in relief. Upon reaching the hall, Jesus smiled and prepared to introduce Rick's group, but then he realized they were standing far away and had forgotten to tell them about the tiger. After a brief explanation, they all approached. As they walked, Jesus introduced Rick and his team to the others. In a kingly manner, Ezekiel welcomed the friends from afar, asking why they sought an audience with him. Rick was a little uncomfortable. It was the first time he had ever called someone king, but he quickly adjusted to it. Rick explained that they were from Alexandria's safe zone, the Hilltop, and the Kingdom 3 communities, all forced to serve the saviors. Alexandria's safe zone once fought the saviors, and they won. At the time, they didn't know much about the saviors, and it was only later that they realized that they had merely exterminated an outpost of the saviors. They came to know that the kingdom also provided tributes to the saviors, which meant they must have experienced how those brutes ruled through violence and fear. At this point, Jesus explained to Ezekiel, because the kingdom's tribute to the saviors is a secret that even the inhabitants of the kingdom don't know about. Ezekiel was slightly annoyed that Jesus revealed this to outsiders. Rick continued, stating that they came to request the kingdom's help, to join them in resisting the saviors, fighting for the freedom of everyone. Ezekiel calmly responded that their request was dangerous. Michonne added that several of their people were brutally killed by the saviors.
Who?
Abraham. Glenn. Spencer, Olivia, Eugene was taken. They took Daryl. He escaped. Every second he's out here, he's a target.
Hearing this, Morgan also moved. Rick continued, emphasizing that his people were strong, very strong, but currently, they were understaffed, and the saviors had looted all their guns. That's why they needed to join forces with everyone. Ezekiel remained silent. Richard, standing beside him, spoke up, stating that they had manpower and weapons. If they united and struck first, they could undoubtedly defeat the saviors. Richard also hates the saviors so much that he has to pay tribute to the saviors every week in return for nothing but demands and humiliation. He urged Ezekiel to seriously consider the matter and not wait until it was too late to resist. Ezekiel didn't immediately agree to their proposal but offered them a night's rest. He said he would ponder over it and give them an answer the next day. Rick didn't say much and could only wait. That night, Benjamin also talked to Ezekiel about his views on the saviors. He believed the kingdom should cooperate with Rick. Benjamin and Ezekiel said, "You saw the look in Rick's eyes. They'll fight with or without our help. They can't win if we don't help them and turn our backs on them. If they win, it indirectly helps us, but that's not our style. You put me under Morgan's tutelage so I'd be ready for anything, and I am." Ezekiel appreciated Benjamin's sense of responsibility and felt proud of him, but he needed more time to think about it. On the same night, something happened at Alexandria's safe zone. After Rick and the others left, Gabriel took up the responsibility of protecting the community and was on duty tonight. Feeling bored, he flipped through the Bible. Suddenly, Gabriel sensed some activity within the community, seemingly coming from the armory. Thinking it might be a rodent, he proceeded without any precautions, but then he heard the sound of things being knocked over inside. Next, Gabriel started loading all the food and some of the weapons in the armory into crates, which were then loaded onto a vehicle. Afterward, Gabriel closed the gate and left with all the community's supplies. If one were to look closely, they would see a figure in the passenger seat. The next morning, the kingdom was as peaceful as ever. People exercised, and children practiced archery. Richard brought Rick and his group to see Ezekiel, and they were all eager to know his decision. In the end, Ezekiel refused to join the resistance against the saviors. It wasn't that Ezekiel lacked courage, but he couldn't bear to see more children become orphans. Many parents had already sacrificed for the community. Daryl couldn't help but quip, "You call yourself a king, but you lack the spirit of a true leader." Ezekiel wasn't offended, only telling Daryl that resisting would come at the cost of lives. Then, Ezekiel turned to Rick and explained that while the peace with the saviors was unstable, at least it was peace, and he had to hold onto it for the sake of his people. Ezekiel says he can let Daryl stay. The saviors won't get into the kingdom. Though disappointed, Rick and his group didn't argue further and left without saying goodbye. Richard personally escorts Rick and the others because Ezekiel doesn't approve, but he wants to join Rick's team. However, Rick told Richard that they currently lacked manpower and weapons and had to wait for the right moment. Richard argued that the longer they waited, the stronger the saviors would become, implying that it was their contributions that strengthened the saviors. So, the longer they delayed, the harder it would be to defeat the saviors. Rick naturally understands this, so now he has to go around looking for allies and weapons. The gate opened, and everyone prepared to leave. Daryl initially wanted to follow them, but Rick convinced him to stay. It was safer, and he could talk to Ezekiel more. The next time they gathered would be the time for action. They drove back from the highway, but they found themselves blocked by a dozen cars. Jesus analyzed that it was the Savior's doing. Carl directed everyone's attention to the other side, where the Savior's base was. They had blocked the road to prevent anyone from passing through. They decided to move the cars and put them back in place after crossing the road. At this moment, Michonne, holding a pair of binoculars, noticed something. Rick took the binoculars and was shocked. The highway they were on was a spur road. When they walked into the main road, there was a cable tied with many bundles of bombs. Once triggered, it would be a big explosion. While everyone was wondering, Carl said that when they were hiding behind the truck, they heard someone talking about using bombs to deal with the zombies. Rick realized that the reason for blocking the side road with cars was to concentrate the zombies here and then trigger an explosion to destroy the zombies. It was evident that a horde of zombies would pass through here soon. They all had the same idea. It's claiming these explosives for yourself that gives you an extra chance against the saviors. But the hardest part is dismantling the... Rosita stepped forward and opened a manhole cover, revealing the detonation device. Disarming the explosives was her expertise. As she prepared to deactivate the detonator, Jesus' radio received an internal order from the Saviors. The Saviors were sending a team to check if Daryl had returned to Alexandria safe zone. They would arrive before lunch. The situation is critical and they must return before the Saviors arrive. While Rosita successfully disarmed a black object, it was only the first step. They needed to dismantle the bombs attached to the cable. Each member proceeded with utmost caution, afraid of triggering any mishaps. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. Rosita directed them to load the disarmed bombs into the car. If there were no dents or tears, it meant they were not triggered and could be kept for their use. If anything seemed off, they couldn't keep it. Rosita put it back on the grass. Carl called out to his father, pointing at the distance. A horde of zombies was approaching, and they had to hurry and disarm the rest of the explosives. In a matter of minutes, they disarmed most of the bombs. Rick directed the others to drive the cars to the designated area. They wasted no time and quickly moved the cars back to the side road, restoring them to their original positions. As the zombies get closer, Rick tells Sasha and Jesus to walk back to the hilltop. Time was running out. Carl had already returned the cars to their original positions. The zombie horde was almost there. Michonne suggested they split up to escape. Feeling a bit panicked, Rick refused. Because he thought of an issue, they had to let the zombies here be partially destroyed and cause an explosion. Otherwise the Saviors would know that the bomb here had been disarmed. Rick decided that he and Michonne would each drive a car. They would simultaneously start the cars to destroy the zombies. They quickly got into their respective cars, and with a special method, they started the engines. The zombies were getting closer, and Michonne's hands trembled a bit, but she managed to start the car. Rick succeeded as well. They exchanged a glance. Rick gave the order, and the two vehicles charged forward, heading straight into the zombie horde. The rope connecting them acted like a cutting machine, slicing through the zombies' bodies. They drove until they reached a crossroads, and Rick and Michonne quickly got out of the cars. They needed to break free from the encircling zombies as soon as possible. The zombies were already closing in, pulling at them relentlessly. They had to use all their strength to shake off the zombies. Once a zombie latched onto them, there was no chance of survival. Michonne is a little far away. Rick can only hold some of the zombies in place. Finally, with a narrow escape, they got back into the cars, though they managed to get away from the terrifying zombie horde. Rick was still shaken. It had been too dangerous. If they had been caught by the zombies, it would have been all over. After they had traveled more than 10 meters, the bombs they left behind exploded, so as not to arouse the Savior's suspicions. Soon, they returned to the community, but they hid the cars around it, as they couldn't risk the bombs inside being discovered. Tobin saw the group returning on foot and hurriedly approached them to ask what had happened. Rick didn't answer. He didn't want to reveal their confrontation with the Saviors until he was sure. Just as they were speaking, the sound of car engines came from behind them. The Saviors arrived in several large trucks, swaggering into the community. Rick and the others knew exactly why they were there, but they had to pretend they didn't know. Simon was leading the group this time, imitating Negan's every move. Simon told Rick they were looking for Daryl. Rick retorted, "Didn't you guys take him away before?" Simon pointed at Carl and said, "Your son visited, and then Daryl disappeared. We suspect there's a connection." Then Simon ordered his men to search the community. If they found Daryl here, Simon intended to kill him in front of everyone. Rick couldn't stop them from searching the community. Luckily, Daryl had stayed in the kingdom. These bandits went into every house and destroyed everything inside, not looking for people, but just vandalism. Later, Simon reached the warehouse, but the shelves that once held food were now empty, making him wonder if they had hidden the goods. Rick was also puzzled. Everything seemed to have disappeared. Simon warned them that hiding supplies was a grave offense with dire consequences. Aaron improvised, saying they had too many people, and finding food had become increasingly difficult. He explained that their recent focus was on getting what Negan needed, and they were still adjusting to the new system. Rick quickly adopted a submissive tone, assuring Simon that they would find more supplies today, and if he was willing to wait, they'd bring them back soon. Simon was pleased with their attitude, telling them to relax as they weren't there to collect tribute today. After the saviors searched the community and found no trace of Daryl, they left. Once they closed the gates, Rick turned around and asked what had happened in the storage room. Aaron said they were not sure, but it seemed to be related to Gabriel. Tobin added that Gabriel was on duty yesterday when Rick went out, but when he came to change shifts in the morning, he didn't see Gabriel. The storage room and the armory were also empty, and a car was missing, and no one had seen Gabriel. Rosita immediately cursed, believing that the coward had fled with supplies. Others joined in, as the evidence seemed clear. However, Rick didn't believe it. Gabriel had been weaker before, but his transformation was evident, and his eyes wouldn't lie. So, the group headed back to the warehouse. Gabriel's Bible was still lying on the ground. Rick picked up the dropped Bible and searched for clues, but unfortunately found nothing. Others speculated that recent events might have frightened Gabriel, causing him to abandon everyone and run away. However, Rick knew that even if Gabriel ran away, he would never leave his Bible behind. He cherished it. The others searched around but found no traces. Rick then flipped open the register and found 4 letters written on the last page, spelling the word ship. This was Gabriel's message. Rick and Aaron immediately thought of a place. This place is where Aaron and Rick found the supplies earlier. But how did Gabriel know about it and leave a message? The truth could only be known by visiting that place. An hour later, Rick led the group back to the lakeside. They carefully searched the area for any clues left by Gabriel. Soon, Rick noticed something: footprints along the lake's edge. They followed the trail into the woods. After a while, they arrived at a house where clear footprints still remained, indicating possible recent habitation. The group cautiously surveyed their surroundings. Suddenly, a noise rang out. They turned their heads to see that a man in black was aiming a gun at them, and there were several other men in black not far behind them. Immediately after, a large number of women with weapons walked up. They remained silent, and the men also had long hair. They swarmed in such an eerie manner, and their numbers kept increasing, at least nearing 100 people. They surrounded Rick and the others. The rest of the group looked tense, unsure if these people would harm them, but Rick smiled as he saw them. These people were part of a new organization living in a scrapyard, remaining undiscovered for a long time. They all dressed in black, and the men had long hair and a tall stature. The women were also valiant and exuded an aura of majesty. In contrast, Rick's group felt somewhat small amidst this crowd. Soon, they were surrounded. A tall woman walked forward, carefully studying the man before her. Rick introduced himself, but the woman didn't respond. Instead, she threatened, saying their lives were in her hands and demanded valuable items as a ransom. Rick explained that one of their group, Gabriel, had been captured by them, and he wanted to see him first before discussing anything. The woman nodded to her companion, and a few minutes later, Gabriel was brought to the scene, his clothes taken away, but seemingly unharmed. Rick finally let go of his heart. As long as the people are fine is the best. He knew he hadn't misjudged them. Feeling Rick's eyes, the terrified Gabriel also had some confidence. This team did not let him down. The woman then said that they had been eyeing the supplies on a ship for a while but hadn't risked going for it. After Rick and Aaron took it, they were followed by this group. But unfortunately, the saviors got hold of the supplies again. They were trying to sneak into the community warehouse to steal something, but they ran into Gabriel on patrol and took him away. Rick mentioned that the supplies in the warehouse were meant for trading lives. He warned that they would soon have nothing left. The saviors wouldn't spare any group. Encountering the saviors left them with 2 choices: to be killed or enslaved. However, there was a third option: joining Rick's group and resisting them. This was the reason Rick had smiled when he saw so many people. They needed more members in their fight. The woman mocked Rick, but after a moment of silence, she declined Rick's proposal, signaling her men to take Gabriel away. Soon, others surrounded Rick's group, preparing to subdue them. Rosita was the first to resist. Rick tried to stabilize the situation and suggested they all sit down and talk.
Let us go, or I will kill her!
Gabriel understands that these people are only interested in profit, so he spoke up and said that this organization, the Saviors, they have other places, other communities. They've raided more things than they can count. Food, weapons, cars, fuel, everything you could want, the Saviors had. The woman listened, and her interest was piqued. She gestured for her men to put away their weapons. Clearly, This woman wouldn't be swayed by ideals, so they had to appeal to her interests. Although the men put away their weapons, Gabriel remained wary of them. Rick nodded at Gabriel, who then raised his knife above his head and dropped it to the ground. The woman didn't change her mind and asked Gabriel to explain in more detail. Gabriel composed himself and said that if they joined forces to eliminate the Saviors, they could get a lot from them. The amount of supplies the Saviors had was beyond imagination and could sustain them for at least 10 years. The woman looked at Gabriel, considering his words. She then had her men take Rick to a slope. The others looked puzzled, wondering what this was about. Michonne was worried, but Rick assured her to relax. They probably wanted to see his capabilities. Rick followed the woman inside while the others waited outside. Michonne asked the woman nearby where they were taking Rick. The woman pointed upwards, and everyone's gaze followed. They had reached the top of a garbage dump. Rick took a closer look and realized that this place had been a garbage disposal area before the apocalypse. As Rick wondered why they brought him here, the woman began to speak more about their group's survival. They had been cautious, only scavenging for easily accessible food. But things were getting worse, and many canned goods were rotten. The proposal Rick made had its merits. They indeed needed to change. However, they wanted to see if Rick's group was worthy and capable.
What did you do?
Rick stood on top of the garbage heap but was suddenly pushed down by the woman next to him. Rick was dazed from the fall, but when he got up, he discovered there was a zombie in the vicinity, covered in spikes. Feeling anxious, Rick realized that the narrow space made it impossible to maneuver properly. He managed to grab a keyboard from behind and slammed it hard onto the zombie, but it only pushed the zombie back a few steps. The rubbish on the floor also restricts his movement. As the zombie approached again, weaponless Rick had no choice but to use his hands to defend himself, but the spikes pierced through his palms. Rick endured the pain and pushed the zombie away with force. The space was too cramped, only 7 or 8 square feet in size. Rick tries to kick the zombie away, but the blades on the zombie cut his legs, causing more pain in his arms and legs. Before Rick could catch his breath, the zombie approached once more, remaining calm. Rick observed his surroundings, thinking he might find a way to climb out. Otherwise, if he continued like this, he would either be eaten by the zombie when his strength ran out or be impaled by the spikes above. As Rick climbed up about 2 or 3 meters, he lost his grip and fell, hitting a metal barrel. He turned to see the damned zombie approaching again. If it pounced on him, he'd be doomed. Meanwhile, Michonne outside was extremely anxious, loudly suggesting he use the walls. Rick heard the hint and suddenly realized the falling rubbish knocked the zombie down, and Rick finally breathed a sigh of relief. He then triggered more collapses until the zombie was pinned and unable to move. Rick picked up a piece of cloth, wrapped a shard of glass, and fiercely stabbed the zombie's head multiple times, venting his frustration. With the zombie dealt with, Rick looked at the woman and said, "Now, do you believe us? Tell me what you want, and I'll find it for you." The woman remained silent and gestured to have the rope thrown down. Enduring the pain in his hands and legs, Rick climbed back up. A few minutes later, Rick stood up once again. The woman looked at him again, with a hint of admiration in her eyes. Then she spoke, saying she needed guns, a lot of them. If Rick could provide them, she would immediately help him in the fight. Rick glanced at Michonne and the others with a satisfied smile. A few minutes later, they descended from the garbage heap.
You know we will win?
Oh, I know it.
After we get half of what's won.
You'll get a third. And we're taking back what you just stole from us.
Half.
A third.
Half.
A third.
A third and we keep what we stole. Half of the jars. The ones we took. One time, this time. Yes. Say yes.
Yes.
They're planning how to divide up Negan's the Savior's property. Finally, the woman told Rick her name was Jotties. Her subordinates returned Rick and the others' weapons and slowly dispersed. Today's matter has come to an end like this. Rick walked out with a limp, a smile on his face. The plan to stand against Negan had finally made significant progress, and the other members also had smiles on their faces. Though uncertain if they would find the guns, they had at least found allies. After a while, Jotties sent people to return the stolen canned goods to Rick, which were essential for the community's survival. Gabriel apologizes to Rick for the other night, but Rick says as long as he's safe it's fine, and also finding allies who resisted the Saviors was a fortunate outcome. Gabriel felt touched by Rick's trust in him. Most people would have cursed him for taking all the supplies and assumed he ran away with them. However, Rick believed Gabriel was coerced and came all this way to find him. Even if Rick is surrounded by so many people and smiles at Gabriel when he sees that he's okay, that's from the bottom of his heart that he treats Gabriel as a family member. Gabriel feels fortunate that his previous transformation was aided by Rick's guidance and helped him grow. Gabriel is aware of how weak he used to be and firmly believes that in the future, they will defeat the Saviors and correct the chaos in this world. After some chatting, they prepared to head back to the community to regroup. The next step was to find the guns and take down the Saviors, a goal that seemed within reach now. Meanwhile, at the kingdom, it was time for the tribute day. Morgan and the others were waiting early. After about half an hour, the Saviors arrived. The same group as before, and the tribute seemed to go smoothly. Jared provocatively asked Richard to hand over the gun, saying that this is what he wanted. In the end, Jared and Richard got into another conflict, making the atmosphere tense. Ezekiel had no choice but to order Richard to give the gun to Jared. Jared wore a smirk on his face, tauntingly looking at Richard, as if to say, "You think you can challenge the Saviors?" Richard suppressed his anger and reluctantly handed over the gun but couldn't resist adding some trash talk along with it. Jared was furious. He raised his hand to beat Richard. This time Morgan came to his aid and directly knocked the gun out of Jared's hand. Jared snatched Morgan's staff in anger and hit him on the ear. Benjamin stepped in and sent Jared flying. Gavin of the Saviors spoke up to stop it, a man who was actually more or less reasonable despite being of the Saviors. Richard wouldn't have survived if it had been anyone else. Gavin just warned Ezekiel that even though Jared started it, this kind of thing can't happen again or he'll be provoking the Saviors. Gavin's reminder was also well-intentioned, and after speaking, they prepared to leave. Morgan pleaded with Jared to return the staff, as it was a gift from a dear friend. It was only at Gavin's repeated requests that Jared left with the stick. The people present felt disheartened. When will these days end? Back at the kingdom, Daryl asked Morgan if they went to pay the tribute, and Morgan didn't deny it. Seeing the blood on Morgan's ear, Daryl could guess it was the Saviors' doing. Daryl didn't understand why they wouldn't agree to ally with Rick and chose to be so submissive. He continued, saying if Carol were here and saw Morgan getting beaten, and if she knew what happened to Abraham and Glenn, she would lead them to seek revenge and kill all the Saviors. Morgan didn't argue, acknowledging that Carol would indeed act that way. But Morgan also mentioned that this was the reason why Carol wanted to leave everyone behind. Daryl had nothing to say and left after watching Morgan for a while. Later, Daryl went to the shooting range where Richard was practicing with arrows. Richard was not allowed to carry guns anymore, so he practiced with a bow and arrows. However, Richard's archery skills were not that great. Richard handed the crossbow to Daryl, having heard that he was an excellent crossbowman. Then Richard led Daryl to a hidden place, an RV where Richard had secretly stored some firearms and weapons. He had also made many Molotov cocktails. Richard had always hated the Saviors and was eager to join forces with Rick and the others to kill them, but Ezekiel, the king, disagreed. Richard comes up with a ruse and prepares to do something to stir up Ezekiel's hatred. Richard leads Daryl to a road where there are abandoned trucks to hide behind without being noticed. Richard told Daryl that the Saviors had been passing through here a lot lately, about 3 or 5 of them. Richard needed Daryl's help because he couldn't handle it alone. They planned to attack the Saviors with guns and then burn them with Molotov cocktails to make their deaths more gruesome. The rest of the Saviors will be furious when they find the body. Richard left some clues along the road that would lead the Saviors to a woman whom Ezekiel cared about. She lived alone in a small cabin outside. Daryl had a hunch that Richard might be talking about Carol, so he kept asking Richard about the woman's name. Richard didn't think it mattered because the woman had guts and she might just survive. He explained that once the saviors found her, they would definitely attack the woman, and Ezekiel, in his fury, would most likely agree to join forces with Rick. Daryl doesn't care about that right now. He just thinks it might be Carol. Richard also realized that they might know each other. Sighing, Richard tried to persuade Daryl to see the bigger picture. Daryl was furious because Carol was like family to him. He gathered his things and warned Richard to stay away from Carol. As they argued, they heard the sound of approaching cars, and it turned out to be the Saviors group. Daryl picked up his crossbow, ready to kill Richard if he made any moves. The two ended up wrestling as well. With cars whizzing past them, Richard continues to persuade Daryl, claiming that there are always sacrifices in war and that the woman would have died eventually anyway. Daryl was angry and told Richard that if anything happened to Carol, whether she died from zombies, illness, or being killed by others, he would kill Richard. With that said, Daryl took his weapon and left. He was going to follow the trail to find Carol. Half an hour later, Carol was reading a book when she heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was Ezekiel coming to see her, she opened the door, only to be stunned and even struggling to breathe for a moment. The person standing there was none other than Daryl. Daryl looked like a hurt child, with tears welling up in his eyes. They had been through so much during this time, and now seeing each other again brought overwhelming emotions. They had always had a close relationship within the group. That night, they sat inside the house and Carol explained the reason for her departure. She didn't want to lose anyone, especially not Daryl. It was a conflicting situation for Carol, as she would kill anyone who posed a threat to the group, but she feared becoming a killing machine. As they talked, Carol finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Daryl's answer confirmed her fears, and she burst into tears, realizing the possible outcome. Then Carol asked, trembling. Daryl hesitated, unsure whether he should tell her everything, fearing it might shatter her peaceful life. Carol let out a sigh of relief, glad that the community was safe. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Rick, Maggie, Glenn, Sasha, or anyone else. Later, they had dinner together.
Ezekiel.
Daryl seemed a bit jealous. Late at night, Daryl left the cabin. He told Carol to take care, and then disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Daryl left the kingdom and headed to the hilltop to prepare for what was to come. As hiding wasn't his style, said in the previous episode, Daryl left the kingdom and headed to the hilltop to prepare for the fight against the saviors. Then who let him go in the first place? Let's go back a few days when Dwight returned and found a dead body on the ground. He was puzzled about who could have done it. A bad suspicion crossed his mind. Then, he turned to look at the motorcycle, and Daryl's bike was gone. Dwight rushed to the room where Daryl was being held, and to his dismay, he found it empty. He knew he was in trouble. If Negan found out, he might get killed. Immediately after Dwight returns to his quarters, he's ready to use the walkie-talkie to report the situation. It was then that Dwight noticed that the chessboard in the room was overturned and Daryl's prison clothes were on the floor. This guy had actually worn away his clothes. Dwight couldn't understand who set Daryl free until he picked up a piece of paper from the ground. It was the same note left by the mysterious person who helped Daryl escape. Dwight immediately recognized the handwriting. He was too familiar with it. Just then, Negan returned from Alexandria's safe zone, bringing Eugene along. Eugene was shaking and scared. Then Negan asked the woman to take Eugene to his room. Eugene thought it was his day to die. When the door opened, Eugene froze, and his nervousness was reduced by half. Because this room was too good to be the place where he was executed. There was a couch, a bookcase, a microwave, and even a fridge. The woman untied Eugene. This is how intellectuals are treated. Negan admired Eugene's talent, so he was considering recruiting him. The woman asked Eugene what he wanted to eat and went to prepare it. Eugene was astonished by the treatment he received. Having the luxury to choose his food, he opted for egg-fried rice. After the woman left, Eugene's mind was still restless. He opened the refrigerator, and its contents amazed him. It was just like before the apocalypse. Everything felt like a dream. Meanwhile, Dwight sat in his room, staring blankly at the note, feeling perplexed. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and Dwight felt something was not right. He quickly hid the note as several burly men stormed in, beating him up. Negan was furious because he knew Daryl had escaped, and finally Dwight was put in that little room. A few hours later, Negan came to the door, and the reason he had Dwight locked up was not because he suspected him of letting Daryl go, but because Daryl was in his custody. Negan informed Dwight that Sherry was also missing, and it all seemed too coincidental. There must be a traitor among them. Dwight began to contemplate. He boldly speculated that Sherry not only freed Daryl while Negan was away but also managed to escape herself. Negan tortured Dwight just because he was angry, but didn't suspect him. If it was Dwight, he would have left with Daryl. So, now Negan needed Dwight's help to find Sherry. Later, Dwight went to the medical room to stitch up his wounds. The doctor, whose name was Emmett, knew them well and knew Shirley well. He stated that it was probably Sherry who did all this because she saw Daryl suffer and set him free. Dwight listened calmly to Emmett's analysis and simply said thank you before leaving. After dealing with his wounds, Dwight rode his motorcycle out, determined to find Sherry. 2 hours later, Dwight arrived at a house, which used to be his and Sherry's home. On the ground, he found a photo of them together. Later, Dwight finds a letter here, left by none other than Shirley, something to the effect of, "I left, Dwight. It was a mistake for us to go back to the Saviors together in the first place. I'm sorry for making you what you are. You said that once you've killed someone, you can't go back. You've become the last person you wanted to be. I really wanted to wait here for you and leave this horrible place together, but I don't know what you're like now. Will you come with me? Or will you capture me and maybe even kill me? I let Daryl go. He reminds you of who you once were, and he's our benefactor. Being in the Saviors is no better or even worse than being dead. I hope you're out of there too, and I hope you remember the little bit of good we had. I love the old you." Sherry left this letter along with their wedding rings, and this unfortunate couple was separated like this. Sherry married Negan to keep Dwight alive, and Dwight pretended to be cold-blooded and heartless to protect Sherry. From now on, Dwight officially began his journey to find his wife. Meanwhile, with Eugene, the woman showed him around the Savior's base and informed him that his status here was the same as theirs. He could take whatever he needed directly. Later, the woman took Eugene to meet Negan. Eugene had experienced Negan's brutality, and he trembled in fear, afraid of Negan's baseball bat smashing his head. Eugene was truly intelligent and quickly understood their way of doing things. To survive and live well, he had to make himself indispensable. Trembling, Eugene told them that he had self-taught to make bullets and found a production workshop. He also claimed to have a PhD in biochemistry and immunomicrobiology, and he was genuinely a doctor. Before the apocalypse, he was a member of the Human Genome Project, researching weapons to combat zombie viruses. While he was speaking, a zombie's lower body fixed on the fence began to decay and fell off. Negan had an idea, and he asked Eugene, "My great doctor, can you easily solve this problem? These zombies are supposed to guard my yard, but the problem is they can't stand still for long, and they fall apart over time. So, Dr. Genius, how can you make them stay in place?" Eugene was getting nervous. If he couldn't answer, he would surely be killed, and they would expose him as a fake doctor. Others looked at Eugene curiously. Just when Negan was getting impatient, Eugene remembered a zombie he and Abraham had encountered once. So, Eugene told Negan that they could melt scrap metal into liquid and pour it on the zombies. After cooling down, it would become very hard. Moreover, if they wrapped the zombies' heads as well, it could prevent their brains from being damaged. Negan was impressed by Eugene's idea. It was a win-win solution. From then on, except for taking orders from Negan, no one else could make Eugene do anything. Even Negan got his wives to spend time with Eugene. Eugene amuses a few of the women with his little chemistry experiments. Eugene adapted to his position and began to bully the lower-class people. Just like other members of the Saviors, he took whatever he wanted, and no one dared to say anything against him. It made him feel great. Dwight also returned, and Emmett changed his bandages again. Emmett was a kind person, so he asked about Sherry's situation. Dwight said he found her but had to kill her. Sherry was surrounded by zombies and he had no choice but to send her on her last journey. Emmett is sorry to hear that, and he urges Dwight not to be kind if he wants to survive here. Dwight looked at Emmett and seemed to make some kind of decision. In the evening, Negan gathered everyone in the factory. Negan's men knew that someone had violated the rules, but no one expected that the unfortunate person was Emmett. Negan picked up a small note, which read, "Dear, I'm gone." It was Sherry's note, which Dwight had found in Emmett's drawer. Yes, Dwight framed Emmett. After leaving the medical room, Dwight immediately told Negan that Sherry had been torn apart by zombies and that Emmett was the traitor. Dwight claimed that Emmett liked Shirley, because Shirley couldn't bear to see Daryl suffer, so he helped Shirley let Daryl go, and finally told Shirley to hurry up and leave. Dwight framed Emmett partly because he knew too much, and partly because they needed a scapegoat. Negan was naturally furious when he found out. This guy not only let his pet go but also made his sexy wife leave, which led to Sherry's death. Emmett tries to counter that Dwight set him up, but Negan asked him directly what reason Dwight had to do it. Sherry's dead. What does Dwight have to gain by setting you up? Even if Sherry were still alive. Once Negan found her, Dwight should understand his fate. So, you tell me, what does Dwight gain by deceiving me? Emmett couldn't say anything for a moment. He couldn't think of Dwight's motive for lying. Negan took the red-hot branding iron and slowly walked towards Emmett, and everyone couldn't bear to watch. Emmett begged and hoped Negan would spare him.
No! No, please!
Now you know I hate this shit. Just tell me you did it and that you're sorry and I don't have to do this.
Upon hearing Negan's words, Emmett immediately admitted that he did it and kept apologizing. Negan seemed to have spared Emmett and dropped the branding iron.
That's all you had to say. That is all you had to say.
On the other side, Rick and Michonne are cooperating with each other, actively striving to find supplies. They had hoped to find guns to use against the Saviors, but after days of searching, they found very few guns, not even bullets. They can only try their luck in more distant places. One day, while taking a brief rest in the woods, Michonne unexpectedly spotted a wild deer. She went back to the car and retrieved a silenced pistol. However, by the time Michonne returned to look for the deer, it had vanished without a trace. They continued forward in that direction and arrived at a location with protective fencing. Rick knocked and soon a zombie came over. This guy was supposed to be a soldier in life and it had a sniper rifle on its back. 2 minutes later, they dealt with the zombie. Michonne took the firearm, and it seemed like no one had been to this place before. Then they headed inside. It was obvious that something terrible had happened here a long time ago. They might be able to find the guns they needed. They climbed onto the roof to assess the surroundings. However, what they saw made them feel both excited and solemn. There were numerous zombies below, with nearly half of them wearing military uniforms. Maybe before the end of the world, the army came here to help with the disaster, but everyone was accidentally turned into zombies. They exchanged glances with smiles on their faces. This was the place they were looking for because these soldier zombies were armed with guns. The only challenge is to get rid of all the zombies. Michonne took a deep breath, believing that with a well-thought-out plan, they should be able to handle it. Just as they were smiling at each other, the rooftop suddenly collapsed, and they both landed on the mattresses below. Instead of feeling unlucky, they laughed even louder. Falling together seemed like a joyous event, perhaps a romantic aspect of the apocalypse. However, Rick's smile disappeared as he carefully looked ahead and urged Michonne to do the same. Their front was piled with a large amount of food, including various canned items and compressed rations. Today was truly a lucky day. As the day grew darker, they decided not to act and rest for the night. Tomorrow, they would deal with the zombies and search for firearms. They lit many candles to create a romantic atmosphere and enjoyed the delicious food they hadn't tasted in a long time. Feeling immensely content, the next morning, they began their operation. There were at least 50 or 60 zombies here, so they planned to lead them to a more advantageous position. Without hesitation, Rick charged forward, and Michonne covered the rear. Working together, they quickly pushed a car ahead. Originally, the plan was to use the car to block the gap in the fence and then kill the zombies one by one. However, a problem arose when they discovered that the car's brakes were faulty, and they were suddenly met with rifle shots. It turned out that a zombie's gun was jammed, and getting hit by that bullet would have been a real stroke of bad luck. The malfunctioning brakes caused the car to crash through the fence. In an effort to avoid bullets, Michonne ended up in the trunk. The car finally came to a stop in a low-lying area, and zombies from all around gathered, covering the car in just a few minutes. The plan had failed, and they had to quickly climb out through the sunroof, preparing to find another solution. Fortunately, the amusement park had a fence, so they leaped over it. It seemed like a good approach, as the zombies were blocked outside, and they could kill them one by one, but soon they realized that the fence wouldn't hold up. The zombies easily knocked it down, and they had to create distance from the zombies before finding a better location. Facing the encirclement of zombies, they decided to split up and act separately. So, Rick and Michonne each led a portion of the zombies towards the side. They had killed countless zombies in the apocalypse, which was not much of a challenge for them as long as they were careful. Rick once again locked himself in the fence and made noise to attract the zombies. Michonne is just as ready to kill zombies. After killing some zombies, they leisurely chatted and counted how many zombies were left on their side. At that moment, Rick looked in a certain direction and saw that the deer had arrived there. Rick doesn't bother with the zombie anymore but climbs up the Ferris wheel. He's going to kill the deer as a surprise for Michonne. However, just as Rick was about to shoot, he noticed a few more zombies coming from afar. He thought it over and decided not to shoot. Unfortunately, the railing became unstable, causing Rick to fall. Michonne's side has already killed all the zombies and is distraught at the sight of the scene. Rick dropped. A dozen zombies had surrounded him. He hurriedly picked up his pistol and killed the zombies while moving to the rear. Michonne ran anxiously, her face filled with concern. When she reached the railing, she saw Rick in a dangerous situation. Rick's pistol is out of bullets. At that moment Michonne froze. Her mind went blank, staring at the scene before her. Forgetting that she was even in danger, her hand dropped the knife unconsciously. The zombies also noticed Michonne and started walking towards her, but she was still unaware of them due to her mental haze. At that moment, 10 minutes later, they had dealt with all the zombies in that area, and they embraced tightly. Next was to collect the dropped firearms. They gradually filled the cart with more and more guns, including pistols, rifles, and even machine guns. Another 2 hours later, they were driving back to the community with their supplies. However, Michonne was not in high spirits along the way, so Rick had to stop the car and prepare to have a good talk with her. Michonne had almost lost Rick just now, and thinking about it made her unable to feel happy. Their affection for each other was deep and genuine. They cared and loved each other deeply. Michonne always believed in Rick's abilities and supported and encouraged him unconditionally. In the afternoon, Rick and the people from the community came to the garbage dump again and handed over the guns to Jotties, hoping that they could join forces to fight against the saviors. After obtaining the guns, Tara counted the firearms, and there were a total of 63 guns, but Jotties said it still wasn't enough. Rick and the others are a little angry. What does that mean? Jotties said that twice as much of this would be enough if fought for them. This was unpleasant news as they had been deceived by Jotties. She deliberately hadn't mentioned the specific quantity of guns they needed when they made the deal. Rick was frustrated as it had taken a lot of effort to find these guns, and it was also a stroke of luck. Now, they had no idea where to find more firearms. Tara noticed Rick's distress, but hesitated to share something. Back at the community, Tara still seemed troubled, catching Rick's attention, and he asked her what was wrong. Do you all remember that before the Savior's slave community? Tara and Heath went out together and they were separated by zombies and she fell down the river. Eventually, Tara ended up in a secluded place where a group of women lived, and they had a lot of guns. When Tara left, she promised not to tell anyone about that place, leaving her conflicted about whether to tell Rick or not. Under the beautiful post-apocalyptic sky, a woman walked on the road, occasionally encountering a few scattered zombies. Carol easily dealt with the zombies. Soon, Carol arrived at the gate of the kingdom, where 5 or 6 zombies were lurking. Carol found a billboard, climbed up a tree, and skillfully eliminated the zombies one by one. Inside the kingdom, the people noticed the commotion and opened the gate, witnessing Carol's effortless zombie killing skills. Leaving them stunned, they recognized Carol, and Benjamin was particularly excited. Wondering how the seemingly delicate woman could be so powerful, Carol comes to the kingdom to ask about Morgan, Daryl, and Rick. She wanted to know what they were doing here a few days ago and if anything had happened to the community. She had a feeling that Daryl was hiding something from her. Though Morgan did not directly answer, Carol had her suspicions. Morgan continued, saying that he followed Carol's request not to tell others about her whereabouts and not to reveal her actions. Daryl found her on his own. Morgan offered to accompany Carol back to Alexandria's safe zone if she wanted to go back. Carol fell silent, contemplating her decision, and eventually turned and left. Carol was conflicted, as she worried about the safety of her friends but also yearned for seclusion and wanted to avoid any further bloodshed. Benjamin caught up with her and suggested that if she didn't mind, he could escort her back to her cabin. Today, they were supposed to go for tribute, but he can skip it. Hearing this, Carol paused. Benjamin explained that he was trying to learn survival skills. There were 5 zombies at the gate earlier, and if Carol could teach him how she dealt with them, he would be grateful. Today was the day the kingdom was making their tribute again. Ezekiel stood quietly, observing the scenes in the distance. Teachers were instructing children, fathers were taking their babies for a stroll, and people seemed to be living contentedly. That's why Ezekiel doesn't want to work with Rick and doesn't want the people of the kingdom to know about the saviors, so the tributes are done quietly. And this week they're paying tribute to 12 cantaloupes. Soon, the group set off for the tribute location, but after just 5 minutes of walking, their path was blocked. Richard, holding a gun, went to investigate. The road was blocked by a row of shopping carts, but there was no sign of anyone around. The rest of the group got out of the car and remained vigilant, fearing an ambush. To be safe, they decided to inspect the surroundings. As they reached a corner, they noticed a hole in the ground with a message written on it. "Bury me here." It's obvious that someone has prepared a grave for himself. Everyone couldn't help but feel how this world had driven people insane. They found nothing unusual after checking around and moved the shopping carts aside. However, the saviors were already waiting at the tribute location. Jared was swinging with Morgan's stick for half an hour. The kingdom is just arriving. As Ezekiel stepped out of the car, he hurriedly explained that they had encountered a situation on the road.
King.
Ezekiel was angry, too, but dared not speak out. They moved out of the way to allow Gavin to inspect the tribute. Gavin went behind the door of the car and counted the number of cantaloupes, then said, Ezekiel thought that the saviors were being greedy and that this was not stipulated in the agreement. He immediately raised his gun and prepared for a confrontation. Gavin, without looking back, said, "You have a choice. Either surrender your guns or start shooting. You can try and see which one you'll choose." Richard, in an unusual move, suggested that they should just surrender their guns. Morgan, too, added that it would be better to avoid a tragedy over a mere stick. Reluctantly, Ezekiel had his people hand over their guns, leaving them feeling frustrated. Gavin continued, saying that the reason they took away their guns was because they knew they might get emotional. The tribute they offered was 1 cantaloupe short, and the saviors demanded 12, not 11. Ezekiel went to inspect the goods and confirmed the shortage. He was puzzled, as he had carefully counted the cantaloupes before getting into the car. The reality was right in front of him. Gavin took away their guns. He was going to make them pay. He was going to teach them a good lesson. Ezekiel tried to persuade Gavin that they would deliver twice the tribute within an hour, but Gavin insisted that the agreed-upon time was now, not an hour later, and they failed to fulfill their obligation. Moreover, he had repeatedly warned them not to make any mistakes, otherwise they would have to face the consequences. Jared understood that, according to the Savior's rules, someone had to be killed in this situation. Jared aimed his gun directly at Richard. The others looked at each other but didn't dare to move at all, or the incident would only get worse. Richard took a step forward and said, "No one expected Benjamin to be the one who got shot."
We need to get Benjamin back to the kingdom.
Give the man his damn stick. Get in the truck. Don't say a goddamn word.
We need to get back.
No. Right now, you have to listen. For once, be present and listen. You will make your deliveries on time, every time, and they will be complete. It's A's or F's, no I's. You are going to show me that you understand by bringing the balance of what you owe tomorrow.
We need to go. He's bleeding out.
1 cantaloupe, not more, not less. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
Go patch him up.
He was bleeding profusely and couldn't make it back to the kingdom. Ezekiel decided to go to Carol's place nearby, as he had left many medical supplies there. Richard's face was sad, with some self-loathing in his expression.
Hey! Get in!
Carol was still sowing seeds in the yard when she saw the car speeding in the distance and felt something bad. They didn't have time to explain after the car stopped. Stopping the bleeding was the most important thing. Time is of the essence. Richard prayed guiltily. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, the bandage he had just put on was soaked with blood and he couldn't stop it. Ezekiel holds Benjamin's hand and tells him not to worry and to hang in there. And the kid looks at Morgan. This sentence was Morgan's teaching of the way of peace to Benjamin, but now it sounds very ironic. Half an hour later, Benjamin left the world due to his bleeding wounds, and the atmosphere in the room was filled with sadness. Everyone loved this optimistic and positive young boy, especially Morgan, who considered him not just a student but like a son. Later, Morgan went back to the place where they were stopped on the road. Remembering the past scenes, he wondered if his insistence on the way of peace was truly right. Why did they have to treat a child like this?
Stay away from me. Just listen.
Morgan was stunned. The disappeared cantaloupe was right there. Could today's events have been intentionally orchestrated? The person he thought of was Richard. When the cantaloupe was thrown in front of Richard, he didn't object. Guilt-ridden Richard says that he's the one who deserves to die, and that according to Jared's hatred of him, he should be the one to be killed. Richard deliberately blocked their path, causing a delay in the tribute, and secretly hit a cantaloupe. He wanted his death to serve as a wake-up call for everyone, to inspire Ezekiel to rebel against the saviors, but he hadn't expected it would lead to Benjamin's death. Morgan remained silent, just watching Richard. Richard then recounted his past, living in a camp where, during times of danger, he always believed there would be someone more capable to take charge. He waited, always believing that someone higher would hold up the sky, but when a real fire broke out, Richard's wife and daughter died right in front of him because he kept waiting. He didn't want the kingdom to experience such tragedy again. After hearing all this, Morgan's face softened slightly. Richard approached Morgan and said pleadingly, "Morgan, I know you're an advocate of peace, but can we really keep blood off our hands in this world? Today's tragedy has already occurred, and we can use it to our advantage. We must do something more to prove to the saviors that we've learned a lesson and ensure this won't happen again. Let the saviors believe in us. Once we regain their trust, we can join Rick's alliance and eliminate the saviors." Regarding Benjamin's death, Richard said he would confess to King Ezekiel and spend the rest of his life making amends. That night, Morgan sat alone in his room, pondering Richard's words. The next day, Ezekiel led everyone back to the tribute site.
Did you tell him?
Richard shook his head, indicating it wasn't the right time. Morgan's face turned grim. Then Morgan walked forward, looking at the two sticks on the ground. One was his, and the other belonged to his disciple. It pained him deeply. Soon, the saviors arrived again, and upon seeing them, Gavin understood what had happened. Gavin isn't as cold-blooded and cruel as the rest of the saviors.
He's dead.
Start walking back now before I kill you. You say one word or throw one look, I'll kill you right here and now. Go!
Richard handed the cantaloupe to Gavin, speaking pleasant words, aiming to win the saviors' trust.
I just want to say, we get it. We understand.
Leave him be!
Morgan! Stop! Morgan!
The onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. Morgan, who always advocated peace and kindness, was acting so ferociously. Only when Richard stopped breathing did Morgan regain his composure. Morgan then walked up to Gavin.
That we know how to go on.
Good. Next week, same time.
We understand.
Morgan listens to Richard and gains the Savior's trust by killing Richard as a price. In the end, Morgan asked everyone else to leave and stayed alone outside. He then dragged Richard's body and buried him in the prepared pit. At this time, a group of zombies came outside. Morgan's expressionless face killed the zombies. The zombies became the object of his anger. This incident drastically changed Morgan's demeanor, and he abandoned the idea of a peaceful path. Morgan knocks on Carol's door. Carol opens the door to see why Morgan is here covered in blood. It looks like something happened. Before Carol could ask, Morgan said, "Do you really want to know what happened in Alexandria safe zone?" Carol nodded.
Negan killed Glenn and Abraham.
What?
Beat him to death with a baseball bat. Now the Saviors have Alexandria and Rick and everybody else. Everything they do is for the Saviors now. And they killed more. Killed Spencer, Olivia. Jesus brought Rick and the rest here because Rick wants to fight him. You wanted to know. Now you do.
After speaking, Morgan turned and left. From now on, he'll stay out and kill any member of the Saviors he comes across. Carol tried to stop him, urging him not to act recklessly, and offered him a place to stay in her cabin for a while. Having learned about the situation in Alexandria's safe zone, Carol returned to the kingdom, preparing to reclaim everything for her family.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be here now. We have to get ready. We have to fight.
We do.
Ezekiel was also finally ready to resist, and Morgan was sitting in front of the hut at the moment, sharpening his stick with a knife. Killing Morgan is officially awakened. A woman waving a dagger. This is a necessary survival skill in the apocalypse. In order to resist the Saviors, the residents of the Hilltop actively participate in training, refusing to live under anyone's enslavement. Jesus and Maggie are studying the terrain of the Savior's lair. They must know their enemy well. Days pass one by one. Maggie's prestige in the Hilltop has reached its peak, making Gregory extremely uncomfortable as he feels his power slipping away. Daryl, after leaving the kingdom, has also returned here. It's just that this tough guy feels he can't face Maggie because in his mind Glenn was killed by his recklessness. On this day, a figure appears, and it's Rosita. Rosita has come this time to seek Sasha's help. Unable to wait for Rick to find guns outside, she's ready to call on Sasha to join her in avenging Abraham by assassinating Negan. To avoid affecting Rick's group's plan, Rosita didn't bring the previously dismantled bomb. Instead, she took one of Sasha's expert sniper rifles. By finding a good location near the Savior's lair, they hoped to get a chance to kill the tyrant. They made up their minds at once and never thought of coming back alive. Sasha doesn't tell Maggie about this matter but instructs Jesus and Enid to take care of Maggie and leaves an unfinished bracelet, a gift for Maggie's unborn child.
I'm doing what you asked.
After making all the arrangements, Sasha starts packing up and preparing to leave. Just then, an alarm sounds outside.
The Saviors are coming!
Daryl and the others can't let the Saviors see them. Sasha and Rosita don't plan to hide. Instead, they use the chaos to leave the hilltop through a tunnel Sasha dug. Daryl and Maggie also find a place to hide. If the Saviors see them, both communities will be in trouble. Eventually, Daryl and Maggie have no choice but to hide in the cellar, hoping that these people are not here for a sweep. The saviors are led by Simon, and Gregory enthusiastically greets them, acting like they're long-lost friends. Today is not the day for the Hilltop to make offerings, but Simon has come to take someone. The saviors' base lost their doctor, so they want to take the Hilltop's doctor, Harlan. Harlan doesn't want to leave, but he has no choice.
But we're not here to take more of that. Congratulations! You're moving up in the world. Negan wants you where he is. You're coming with us.
Meanwhile, in the cellar, a savior comes to scavenge for supplies. Daryl initially wants to kill him, but Maggie stops him. Fortunately, the man only takes a couple of baskets of supplies and leaves. After they left, Maggie asked Daryl, since Glenn's death, Daryl has been unable to forgive himself, believing that if he hadn't been reckless, his best friend would still be alive. This has caused Maggie to lose her husband, and her unborn child has lost a father. Throughout their journey, Rick's group has become like a family, and Maggie has never blamed Daryl. They only have one enemy, Negan. Outside, Simon comes out with Harlan, and the residents know he's being taken away. As they watched, they cursed the savior's impudence in their hearts and strengthened their resolve to resist. Rosita and Sasha rush to a residential building, where they find a car that should still be usable. Rosita cuts a hole in the wire fence and smashes a nearby car window, then throws in some gasoline she had with her to start a fire. The commotion attracts zombies, who begin to gather around. Rosita and Sasha quickly sneak in from another direction and start a car using a special method.
Get in!
2 hours later, they arrive in a building opposite the Savior's lair. From here, they can use the sniper rifle to observe the scene outside the main gate. As soon as Negan appears, they can take the shot. To Sasha's surprise, she sees Eugene there. He seems to be doing well and is even giving orders to others. Since Negan isn't there, Sasha decides to holster her gun to avoid being spotted. She tells Rosita about the situation. Rosita was stunned and finally relieved that Eugene had been taken because of her. After a while, Rosita looked down with her scope again, and there she saw Eugene, commanding the two people nearby. However, Negan still didn't show up, so Rosita and Sasha could only continue to wait. They sat together, chatting and passing the time. A little while later, Sasha resumed her surveillance. This time, they heard some noise and the sound of a car coming from below. When Sasha saw Harlan, the Hilltop's doctor, she couldn't help but curse. Those bastards had brought Maggie's doctor here. Finally, Negan emerged, presenting a great opportunity for Sasha. She focused her attention, preparing to take the shot, but Dr. Harlan turned out to be in front of Negan. Sasha didn't dare to make a move. They were too close. There was a risk of accidentally injuring Harlan, not to mention that failing to hit Negan would reveal her position. Moreover, Negan was holding onto Eugene, making it even harder to take a shot. In the end, they had to watch as Negan went back inside. At that moment, their handheld radio started to transmit Eugene's voice. Eugene was giving orders, and from the tone of his voice, it seemed that he held a significant position within Negan's group. Second only to Negan himself, Eugene commanded the saviors to capture a batch of zombies and repeatedly instructed his subordinates not to disturb Negan. Eugene said to report anything directly to him, and Eugene claimed that he was also Negan. Rosita and Sasha cursed under their breath. It seemed like Negan wouldn't come out for a while, so they had to change their plan. Since Negan wasn't coming out, they decided to sneak inside and kill him. Later that night, Eugene was still commanding his subordinates on how to deal with the zombies. Suddenly, he was frightened and crouched down, holding his head in his hands. Rosita and Sasha rushed over, quickly breaking the wire fence and comforting Eugene not to be afraid.
No, I'm not going with you.
Eugene turned away, showing that he didn't want to leave this place. The position he held here was something he couldn't let go of. Rosita cursed under her breath. It turned out that all the things Eugene had said about becoming a survivor were just nonsense. However, Rosita couldn't dwell on that now. Their primary goal was to get inside and kill Negan. Soon, they cut open the wire fence, and Rosita prepared to enter as quickly as possible. At the breach, Sasha took a closer look and asked Rosita to keep watch. The hole in the wire wasn't big enough, and they needed to make it larger, just as Rosita was on alert. She didn't expect Sasha to enter the compound and lock the door behind her.
Go. It's not your time. There's gotta be a point to it, right?
Rosita was furious. She was the one who brought Sasha here, and now Sasha was acting like this. Rosita still wanted to enter, but soon someone came out of the building. Gunshots were coming from inside. It seemed that Sasha had engaged with the people inside. Rosita had no choice but to grab her backpack and quickly escape, running until she reached another street before stopping. As Rosita felt someone was watching her, she turned around and, sure enough, someone was there. A month or so ago, Tara and Heath were out looking for supplies. Unfortunately, Heath got surrounded by zombies with no bullets left in his gun. Despite Tara intending to face death together with him, she was unexpectedly pushed off a bridge by the zombies. I don't know how long it took, but on a remote beach a little girl excitedly ran towards a figure on the shore. The best part of the little girl's day is killing the zombies that wash up on shore. And just as Rachel is about to do it, her sister stops her. A woman named Cindy. Cindy sensed that Tara didn't appear like a zombie, and upon closer inspection, she found signs of life in her. Tara had been washed up on the beach. Rachel knows that Tara is still alive and still wants to kill her because this place can't be discovered by outsiders. But Cindy was too kind to do so and told Rachel not to tell anyone. Rachel left the place in a huff. It's a good thing Tara met Cindy, because if it had been anyone else, she would have been dead. Cindy then dragged Tara to shore and put her in a cool place. Due to their community's strict policy against outsiders, Cindy couldn't bring Tara back with her. Instead, she left some supplies for Tara and departed. Cindy just left. Tara woke up, experienced the end of the world. Tara is not willing to easily trust others. Good thing that woman seems to be very kind, should not be harmful to her. Tara took a big gulp of water from the bottle. Cindy sat on the trunk of the tree for a while and then left. Did not even notice that Tara has awakened, but Tara quietly followed Cindy. She followed Cindy through the forest for several minutes until she lost sight of her. Tara then noticed some houses and a few figures. Proceeding with caution, she continued to investigate. Tara arrived at a plaza and was surprised to witness the presence of women patrolling and attending to other tasks. Strangely, there were no men or boys around, which perplexed Tara. Trying not to attract attention, Tara observed from a distance. Then Tara noticed that on the other side of the room, two women had opened the armory. Oh my god, it's full of guns and ammo. It's horrible. What kind of place is this? Suddenly, the women seemed to have noticed something and rushed towards the arsenal. Tara was taken aback, wondering if they knew someone had intruded. Just as she was contemplating the situation, someone spotted her. The sound of gunfire came from all directions. It was so horrible that if you weren't careful, you'd be killed by the random gunfire. Tara managed to knock down a woman with short hair around a corner and quickly took her gun, ready to defend herself. Beatrice, the woman Tara subdued, wore a tense expression, not begging for mercy but accepting her fate. Tara didn't want to kill them. She knocked Beatrice unconscious. As Tara continued to escape, she encountered Rachel pointing a gun at her. Knowing she didn't want to hurt a child, Tara slowly placed her gun on the ground. However, Rachel was inclined to follow the adult's teachings and was about to shoot Tara. Fortunately, Cindy intervened again, preventing Rachel from pulling the trigger. Soon, the other women arrived, surrounding Tara. Awkwardly, Tara greeted them, assuring them that she meant no harm and had only accidentally ended up there. Natania, an elderly woman, stepped forward, seeming to be their leader. In the end, these people didn't hurt Tara, because Tara had won them over by not shooting when she could have before. As Tara learned more about the situation, she discovered that these women had originally lived outside but encountered another group of people. Those ruthless individuals killed all their men and forced them into servitude. To protect Natania had no choice but to hide the remaining women in this secluded place, avoiding contact with outsiders to keep their location secret. In fact, these women were running away from the saviors. Only Tara didn't know it at the time, and even less understood the horrors of the saviors. The next day, Natania wants Tara to stay and live with them because she is afraid that Tara will expose the place. However, Tara insisted on leaving. Natania, with a kind face, sent two women to escort Tara away. But what Tara didn't expect was that these two women were always following her. Tara is not the first day to live in the post-apocalyptic world. Already guessed that the women are afraid that they want to quietly finish her off in the woods. Tara adjusted her emotions and took the initiative to go forward to kill the zombie. In fact, she used this opportunity to escape. In this way, Tara's heart is scared to run away in the woods. After running for half an hour, Tara was still found by Beatrice. Beatrice hesitated to harm her, but they couldn't risk being discovered by the saviors, so she was prepared to act. Just in time, Cindy arrived to save Tara and led her to the bridge. Tara also vowed not to tell anyone about what happened here. With that, Tara said goodbye to Cindy and set off for home. Unfortunately, Tara didn't know whether Heath was alive or dead. Upon returning, she learned about Glenn and the others' deaths and the community's enslavement by the saviors. This was Tara's experience over a month ago. Initially, she promised not to tell anyone, but the current circumstances were exceptional. Rick and the group needed firearms for their fight against the saviors, and Sasha's fate was uncertain after her assassination attempt on Negan. Thus, Tara and the group set out early, even bringing explosives. They didn't want to resort to violence but knew they had to eliminate the saviors to be free. Soon the group arrived at this closed place. Tara led them into the woods. The operation was divided into 2 steps. Their plan involved Tara negotiating with Natania peacefully, hoping to obtain the guns without violence. The others were positioned outside with explosives as a backup plan. If the negotiation failed, they would take the guns by force, and the women here don't know a thing about it. They're still going about their lives. When Natania arrives at the house, Tara pulls a gun on her and tells her to keep quiet and sit down and talk. Cindy walks in and looks at Tara in disbelief. Tara said straight away that they were desperate and that her companions were out there. If necessary, they would take over this place and they needed to borrow their firearms to resist the saviors. After hearing this, Cindy's expression eased a bit. The people here had a deep-seated hatred for the saviors. However, Natania had developed a psychological shadow towards the saviors and refused to agree no matter what. At this point, Rick saw that Tara was not responding, so he decided to take a more aggressive approach to take over the place. However, the explosives only detonated in the distance and did not harm anyone here. Michonne also prevented anyone from approaching the armory by staying up in a tree.
On the ground now! Those hands, put them on your head.
Please.
Tara also planned to take Natania and Cindy outside to meet up with the others, but Natania pretended to have a leg injury and approached her.
Cindy, stop!
Tara had no choice but to hand over the gun to them, and she said that there were no bullets inside. Natania and Cindy were surprised, but Natania was not soft-hearted. Tara was now their hostage. Meanwhile, the women outside were frightened by the bombs and ran away. Enid and others were already waiting here.
Everybody stay calm. We don't want anyone to get hurt. Stay down and listen to what we say.
We want this to go as simply and as peacefully as possible.
Rick says as he walks away that they've made a lot of noise and he's sorry. So let's get it over with as soon as possible so you can deal with the zombies that have been attracted to you. He reassured them that no one would be hurt, and they only came to borrow some necessary items. At this moment, Natania came over with Tara as a hostage and warned Rick not to harbor any illusions and leave immediately, or else she would kill Tara. Rick wasn't buying it, and he warned Natania not to do anything rash. Michonne was also up in the tree, holding a sniper rifle, but Tara shouted not to shoot, as she did not want anyone to be hurt.
They want us to fight the saviors.
Just let go of her now. Yeah, we'll leave you alone.
This statement made the women all look at each other and finally understand the purpose of these people coming here. They had thought the saviors had come.
Tanya, put the gun down.
Tara continued, saying that they would win as long as they had their guns, whether they helped them or not. They would win. All the men and boys in these women's families have been killed, and they want to try to get revenge. But Natania was so emotional that she refused to give in, and kept persuading the rest of them not to resist the saviors, or else they would end up in a miserable situation. At this point, Michonne noticed that zombies had begun to surround them, and she quickly warned Rick to be careful. Taking advantage of this distraction, Cindy quickly knocked down her grandmother. She did not want to see any bloodshed. By now, the zombies in the woods are starting to gather.
Only!
Don't go anywhere.
Five minutes later, under Rick's organized leadership, the zombies were easily dealt with. The conflict here had basically been resolved. Rick did not harm anyone here, and with their common enemy, the others were willing to lend their guns. The situation here had come to an end, and the next step was to fight against the saviors. A man secretly opened the prison door and sneakily stared at the woman inside. The imprisoned woman is Sasha, who tried and failed to assassinate Negan. The reason why men come here is because they see Sasha's beauty and have the idea to take advantage of her.
If I give you some water, which is not something I'm supposed to do, something I'm not supposed to do,
Faced with such humiliation, Sasha remained strong and calmly told him to go to hell. This blow directly caused the man to fall to the ground in pain, and his handsome face was actually hit by this woman. Men have even less scruples.
I can see that you're trying to rape this woman. Do you really think I need you to answer that?
Negan couldn't tolerate the vile intentions of his subordinates. It was something he despised. Negan had already established rules. No coercion was allowed here, so the man would face consequences. Sasha had no gratitude towards Negan, and she would never forget how Abraham died. Negan acted gentlemanly, ordering another subordinate to bring a new shirt and help Sasha cut the ropes. To Negan, the attack last night seemed like a minor scuffle, and the deaths of a few subordinates were inconsequential. Negan found Sasha familiar and soon remembered who she was. This woman was part of Rick's group and had witnessed Negan brutally killing Glenn and Abraham in that forest. Sasha's response was to avoid jeopardizing Rick and the others' plans. Negan laughed and then said, "Whether or not, you must think you're going to die. After all, you broke in and killed so many of my men, but unfortunately for you, things won't unfold as you expect." Saying this, Negan placed his knife on the ground and added, "Now the knife is yours. You can try to pick it up and kill me. However, I'll be standing over you with my baseball bat, and that wouldn't be a wise choice. Alternatively, you can try to take your own life. Of course, that would be a shame. You can also use the knife to kill the soon-to-be resurrected zombies and redeem yourself, becoming one of my saviors. I admire your courage, and in the future, you could help me run this place. Although our initial encounter was not pleasant, we will always go through some difficult journeys together." Negan turned and left, giving Sasha time to contemplate. Eugene brought some things to make Sasha more comfortable.
What did they do to you?
They're keeping me safe.
He also conveyed Negan's offer to her and tried to convince her to join the Saviors, saying that she could have the same treatment as him. Sasha didn't look at Eugene, she simply stared at the wall in silence. Eugene also understands that Sasha is complaining that he has no backbone, but Eugene told Sasha that he knew he was a coward by nature, and that he thought he would be a survivor like Abraham. But that night in the woods Eugene was really scared, the most scared he'd ever been in his life, and it felt terrible to be slowly waiting to die. From time to time Eugene still dreamt about it, but now that he was here he was much more secure in the fact that he didn't have to think about it anymore. "Please agree," Eugene pleaded. "I don't want to watch you die." Though Sasha didn't accept his plea, she no longer blamed Eugene, understanding that everyone's choices were different. People like Abraham would never bow down. With a sense of helplessness, Eugene turned and left. Meanwhile, within the Hilltop, their leader Gregory had a new idea. Recently, people have even begun to think of Maggie as the leader of the Hilltop, and Rick's team is planning to resist the Saviors. This made Gregory extremely uneasy. Gregory then called one of his men and told him to pack his things and get ready to leave the place together. He was going to tell Negan, choosing the right side was the key to survival. 2 hours later, Negan opened the cell to see what Sasha would choose, and he was pleased with the result. Sasha had killed a zombie and was standing quietly on the side. Expressing her submission, Negan picked up a knife, but he wasn't really going to leave it for Sasha.
That is a damn good start, bud.
Although Sasha was willing to join the Saviors, she would have to be observed for a while. Then Negan told Sasha some news. He had heard from a little bird that Rick and his friends were up to something, and that wasn't a good thing.
And well, that is gonna be a big day.
Tomorrow they're going to the Alexandria safe zone, and you're going to help me correct them. Sasha was afraid. It was obvious that Negan was using her to deal with Rick. She suddenly regretted acting rashly. A few minutes later, Eugene came to the door. He had heard that Sasha agreed to join the Saviors and came in a hurry to confirm. Sasha didn't hide anything and told Eugene that she had only pretended to join the Saviors to find a chance to kill Negan, but now the situation was not good, as Negan had already discovered Rick's plan and was using Sasha as a hostage. Sasha begged Eugene to help her find something, a knife or glass, anything that would let her commit suicide. She didn't want to involve her family. Eugene was also feeling heavy-hearted but said he would consider it. In the evening, Sasha was anxiously pacing in the room, waiting for Eugene's message. Soon after, Eugene came and handed her a pill he had made himself. It would cause death within half an hour of ingestion. The only thing to be grateful for was that the pill would not cause much pain. Sasha sighed with relief, but she was also sad that she would die with this little pill. However, Sasha quickly adjusted her mood, and her face was full of determination.
I want you to go.
Eugene quickly left, knowing that if he was found helping Sasha, he would also suffer. That night, Rick and the others returned to the community after searching for weapons outside. They were greeted by Rosita, who had escaped. Enid immediately asked about Sasha's whereabouts, but Rosita didn't answer, only telling them that someone had come. The group followed her to the basement and saw who it was. Dwight. Dwight also stood up and looked at the crowd. Daryl was instantly agitated when he saw that it was Dwight. He wanted to crush the scum so badly. Dwight not only killed Denise, but also tortured him for a long time. It's a good thing that a few people are trying to stop Daryl. But Rick decided to wait and see.
You want to help? I do. Okay. Get on your knees. Look at me. Why?
Dwight knelt down and looked at Rick in the eye, saying that he wanted to stop all of this and kill Negan.
Why don't you kill him? It can't just be me. They're all Negan. I want Negan dead.
Tara asked about Denise, her girlfriend, whom Dwight had killed, a doctor who had helped many people. Dwight said he wasn't aiming at Denise. In fact, Dwight wasn't really trying to kill Denise at the time, because he wasn't very good with the crossbow at the time and he missed. Daryl didn't believe him because he was filled with resentment.
Land it this way. You go ahead. I'm sorry. I know you want to.
Tara, who's standing in the back, also tells Daryl to kill Dwight to avenge Denise's death. Rick and Michonne thought they shouldn't trust Dwight, as he might be there to spy on Daryl's whereabouts. Dwight then told Daryl that he used to be Negan's man but was no longer, and that everything he had done was for his wife, Sherry, who had escaped. Dwight said they could work together to dismantle the Saviors.
Daryl, you knew her.
You knew me then. Else, she just got away.
Daryl wanted to kill Dwight, but he didn't because he knew Dwight had lost his wife to Negan. Rosita then told them that Sasha had been captured, but they did not know her current condition.
They have Sasha.
Using Dwight might help them save Sasha. Dwight said Negan would be coming tomorrow with 3 trucks and over 20 Saviors. He could help them stall the Saviors, and Dwight would look for something to block the way and help Rick and the others delay their preparations a bit.
I can slow them down.
If they could kill the Saviors, he would spread a false message that everything was going well. Then they could use the trucks to go directly to the Saviors' base and rescue Sasha.
I can lead you right inside.
Finally, Rick let Dwight go. Even though he was normally cautious, Rick could see the look in Dwight's eyes, and he also trusted Daryl's judgment.
I don't give a damn if he's sorry. When this is done,
Daryl made up his mind to punish Dwight after this was over, regardless of whether he regretted what he had done. The next morning, the battle was about to begin. Rick sent Jesus and Enid back to the Hilltop and entrusted his daughter to them, asking them to tell Maggie to stay put.
He doesn't know that Gregory's gone.
It's a very tough decision.
If they lose this battle today, at least no more people will die. Maggie was in a dilemma. Gregory had fled, and she was now the leader of the Hilltop. She didn't know whether to listen to Rick or go to support him. Meanwhile, the kingdom received the message and was preparing for battle. Carol and Morgan were also getting ready.
We've seen this before.
What the hell? He's dead.
For the glory of victory.
As the sky began to lighten, a group of scavengers on motorcycles rode into Rick's community. They had received his message that the battle with the Saviors was happening that day, and with their help and the guns they had brought back, Rick was feeling confident about the upcoming fight. The rest of the group was also busy preparing. Rosita and the others are setting up explosives in an abandoned truck at the entrance, ready to detonate once Negan shows his face. Tara was in charge of driving and blocking the entrance to prevent them from ramming the gate with a car. Michonne and the other scavenger are in the guard tower, covering the men below with sniper rifles. Just as they were getting ready, Negan and the Saviors appeared on the road, only to run into an obstacle, which needless to say must have been Dwight's way of buying Rick some time to get ready. Negan could also see that the trees had been deliberately cut down. Negan wasn't worried though. He had a backup plan. Eugene then approached Negan, asking for a chance to persuade Rick to surrender and minimize casualties. Negan smiled in agreement. Half an hour later, the old man on sentry duty outside signaled and everyone realized that the Saviors were close. Rick was confident, fueled by his well-prepared team and the challenges he had overcome in the past. Rick then turns to look at Rosita, who will detonate the bomb as soon as he gives the signal. Rosita nodded solemnly. So did the others. This battle would determine life or death.
All points are covered.
However, to their surprise, the one leading the Saviors was not Negan, but Eugene. Rick was taken aback. This was completely unexpected. If the bomb went off, his former teammate would also die. After the car came to a stop, Eugene took the megaphone and began trying to persuade them to surrender.
Hello. I come staff with the hope that it is my drop knowledge that you heed. Options are 0 to none. Compliance and fealty are your only escape. Bottom line in it, you may thrive or you may die. I sincerely wish for the former. For everyone's sake, the jig is up and in full effect. Will you comply, Rick?
Where's Negan?
I'm Negan.
Rick felt utterly disappointed upon hearing Eugene's words. It was clear that Eugene wasn't coerced. He had fully joined the Saviors. Rosita shook her head in disappointment as well. Since things had come to this, their old camaraderie had vanished. She looked at Rick. Rick felt distressed but tried to compose himself. Now was not the time to show weakness. Rosita received a signal and immediately pressed the detonation button. However, the expected explosion didn't happen. Rick looked at Rosita with confusion. Even Rosita was perplexed. How could this have happened? Rick understands that this one's a bust. The scavengers betrayed their deal and switched sides. The old man opened the gate, and Negan finally appeared, smugly observing everything. He relished the feeling of being in control. Even Dwight was surprised. He had not been informed of these secret plans by Negan. The truck opened, but the bombs inside had been tampered with by the scavengers. Rick felt a wave of despair. All their efforts had been in vain. Upstairs, Michonne takes aim at Negan, but Negan is kept out of the way by Eugene.
No. We win.
Y'all gonna want to put your guns down now.
No one drops anything.
This time, Rick was determined to resist with all his might. He would not be manipulated like a puppet again, even if it meant death. Rick turned to Jadis, seeking an explanation. Jadis tells Rick that they tracked down the people who took their supplies and just made a better deal with them. Rick couldn't help but feel speechless. Truly, people's hearts were unfathomable. Negan saw that Rick refused to surrender, so he prepared a special gift, a locked box containing Sasha.
I brought her so I wouldn't have to kill all of you, and not killing all of you could get complicated.
Negan looked at Rick and said, he knew Rick had found a lot of guns and his request was simple: hand over all the guns. Rick glanced at Jadis, realizing that she had informed Negan about everything. Negan continued, stating that, as per the rules, they also had to select someone for Lucille to feast upon. He demanded the guns be surrendered immediately, or else Sasha would die, and none of them would survive.
Dwight, Simon.
Let me see her.
Negan smiled. It was a small request he could still fulfill. When he opened the box, however, Sasha had turned into a zombie and lunged at Negan. This sudden turn of events caught everyone's attention. The battle-hardened Rick's team immediately seized the opportunity to counterattack. Michonne engaged in a fight with the other woman. The enemy's numbers were simply too great, and Rosita was accidentally shot. Tara hurriedly pulled her back inside to retreat. Sasha jumps on Negan, making it hard for him to get away. Luckily, one of Negan's men pulls Sasha away, but it gets chewed up by Sasha. Negan has slowed down and he's going to teach these guys a lesson. Rick is distraught as he watches his team fall back, and he and Jadis offer to renegotiate the deal. Jadis responded by shooting Rick and then kicking him down. Michonne was beyond miserable at this point as well. 10 minutes later, Rick and Carl were captured alive, while the rest of the group was scattered due to the gunfight, seeking refuge deep within the community. Negan wasn't in a hurry either. He wanted to play with this father and son in front of everyone. Meanwhile, Michonne continued her struggle with the woman, battered and bruised but resilient.
We'll win. We live. We're the ones.
Negan casually remarked, "Rick, I must tell you, if I had a child, I'd want them to have the backbone your kid has. So hurting him would also pain me deeply." Carl just looked at Negan with a defiant look on his face.
If I had a kid,
you're not gonna win. Carl.
Instead of getting angry, Negan taunts Carl to take a good look at the devastated neighborhood and still be delusional. Just then, screams came from a distant building, and a woman fell from above. Rick felt a pang of pain as he realized it was Michonne's sniper position. Seeing Rick's distress, Negan became even more excited and resumed his mockery. Negan's facial muscles twitched. This situation was completely different from what he had expected. He had thought Rick would beg like a dog. Now it's the complete opposite, as if Rick is the victor. However, Negan quickly put on a smile, unsure if it was to save face or if he genuinely admired Rick.
this is punishment. I warn you, and this isn't a warning. I'm gonna kill Carl now. I'm gonna make it one nice, hard swing.
Already, I'm gonna kill you.
You can do it right in front of me.
You can take my hands. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. You're all already dead.
Dangerous and their accomplices! Alexandria will not fall! Not on this day!
Rick rushed to pick up his gun, but he was drawn by another sound. The Hilltop group had arrived. Daryl and the others also heard the gunfire and rushed back into the fray. Today, Alexandria's safe zone wouldn't fall. It's the first time Negan's ever been in such a mess, and it really scared him earlier, especially when a tiger showed up unexpectedly. What shocked Negan even more was that the widow hadn't died after all. Rick had the audacity to lie to him previously. As the scavengers saw the situation was lost, they quickly fired signal flares. People outside responded by throwing smoke bombs inside and then making their escape during the chaos. The only regret was that Negan managed to flee, arrogantly flipping his middle finger at everyone. The group wanted to pursue, but they couldn't catch up, and the scavengers covered their retreat from the walls. When Daryl finally climbed up, those people were already far away. Only when there were no more enemies inside the community did Carl and Rick rush to the top floor. The body on the ground wasn't Michonne's, and Rick let out a deep breath of relief, while Carl smiled. Michonne was alive, and they had already become a family. However, when they reached the top floor, they found Michonne severely beaten and barely clinging to life. Rick and Carl felt deeply pained at the sight. After this battle, Alexandria's safe zone, the Hilltop, and the kingdom formed a solid alliance. Negan was still alive, and the saviors remained, but at least the days without hope were over. However, they had no idea that Negan's forces were far greater than they had imagined.